Hello everyone, and welcome to the Fictional Vortex. So we are back with an interesting movie on what if Naruto wielded Kamui Kyuubi, becoming the third pillar alongside Ryuko and Satsuki. But before we start, I just want to remind you to please subscribe to my channel and hit the like button if you enjoy my content. Let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Maelstrom and the Monolith. The end of all things did not have the dignity of silence. It was a shriek, a raw, cosmic tearing of every sound that had ever been or would ever be, compressed into a singular, impossible moment of auditory agony. It was the color of paradox, the taste of static on the tongue of a dying god, the crushing pressure of a universe turning itself inside out. For Naruto Uzumaki, it was the feeling of being unmade. Every cell, every atom, every quantum particle that constituted his being was being simultaneously stretched to infinity and compressed into a point of nothingness. The very concept of self frayed like old rope, threatening to dissolve into the screaming chaos. Within the storm, a second consciousness, ancient and vast as a tectonic plate, served as an anchor. "Hold on, boy," rumbled the voice of Kurama, not through sound, but through a direct impartation of will into the churning maelstrom of Naruto's soul. The fusion between them, once a pact, then a partnership. And finally a perfect symbiosis forged in the crucible of the Fourth Shinobi World War, was the only reason he had a self left to fray. Kurama's chakra, a monstrous ocean of vengeful red, bled seamlessly into Naruto's own sun-bright gold, creating a stable, stellar core against the universal dissolution. Their thoughts were one, a shared bulwark against oblivion. Kagaya's last resort, Naruto projected back. His thought a jagged shard of comprehension amidst the pain. A spiteful tantrum, tearing the canvas because she couldn't paint her masterpiece. "She has torn more than the canvas," Kurama corrected, his ancient mind processing the physics of their destruction with cold fury. "She has torn the loom itself. The threads of reality are unraveling. This is not a technique. This is an undoing." There was a moment of absolute white, a silence that was louder than the preceding shriek. It was the sensation of falling through the floor of existence. Time ceased to be linear. He experienced the birth of his world, the heat of its core, the cool kiss of its first oceans, the silent march of its evolution, all in the span of a single, silent heartbeat. He saw nebulae collapse and galaxies ignite. He felt the cold, empty spaces between stars, a loneliness so profound it was a physical weight. Then, just as the concept of Naruto was about to become a forgotten whisper in the cosmic wind, a new sensation asserted itself. Gravity. It was a rude, abrupt, and utterly welcome anchor. The impact was cataclysmic. He punched through the fabric of this new reality like a meteor. The world screaming its protest around him. There was a brief, violent compression of air, a concussive boom that deafened the sky, and then a collision with something unforgivingly solid. The world fractured beneath him. Silence returned. This time a natural one, broken only by a soft, hissing sizzle. Naruto lay at the center of a crater, not of dirt, but of something dark, wet, and man-made. The impact had shattered the concrete ground, creating a perfect spiral of cracks that radiated outwards for 50 feet, as if a giant's fist had hammered the world. Steam, smelling of ozone and superheated stone, rose from his body, coiling into the air like ghostly serpents. He was on his back, staring up at a sky he did not recognize. It was gray, not the gentle, cloud-dappled gray of an overcast day in Konoha, but a suffocating, monolithic ceiling of industrial smog, the color of wet lead. There were no clouds, just a uniform, oppressive sheet of pollution that choked the light and bled all vibrancy from the world. A fine, persistent drizzle was falling, and where the droplets landed on the still faint golden aura of chakra clinging to his skin, they sizzled and evaporated with a faint, acrid scent. He pushed himself up onto an elbow, the movement fluid despite the cosmic ordeal he had just endured. A droplet landed on his exposed hand. It didn't just feel wet, it stung, a faint, but distinct chemical burn that spoke of a world steeped in its own poison. "The air is sick," Kurama's voice echoed in their shared mind, a low growl of disgust. "The very life of this planet, it feels wrong." Choked, Naruto closed his right eye, and focused. He let the world wash over him, not just through his conventional senses, but through the heightened perception granted by Sage Mode. It was second nature to him now. An effortless merging with the natural energy of the world. But the world he connected to was in agony. Natural energy was supposed to be a harmonious symphony, the gentle hum of trees, the steady rhythm of the earth, the vibrant life force of countless living things. Here, it was a dissonant, screeching chorus. Beneath the faint, struggling life song of the planet was a dominant, parasitic frequency. It felt synthetic, hungry, and utterly alien, a discordant shriek of static that grated against his very soul, causing a wave of spiritual nausea to wash over him. It was woven into the very fabric of this place, a blight that his senses screamed was fundamentally unnatural. He pushed himself to his feet, his worn black pants and tattered orange and black jacket feeling heavy with the strange, oily rain. He did a quick mental and physical inventory. He was whole. The fusion was stable. Kurama's presence was a familiar, comforting weight in his gut and a razor-sharp edge in his mind. He ran a hand over his face. His right eye was his own, a brilliant cerulean blue. He touched the skin around his left eye. It was there, safe beneath his eyelid, the greatest, and final gift from his fallen friend. The Mangekyo Sharingan, a key that could bend space and time. A key that had, perhaps, allowed him to survive the unkeying of his own reality. He stood, and truly looked at his surroundings for the first time. He was in a vast, open courtyard, and the structure that dominated it was not a palace or a fortress but something that defied easy categorization. It was a school, he surmised from the layout, but a school built with the architectural philosophy of a tyrant. A single, colossal tower clawed at the leaden sky, a monument of brutalist concrete and imposing black steel. It was less a place of learning and more a temple of absolute authority, designed to make every soul who stood before it feel insignificant. Banners bearing a strange, star-like insignia hung limp in the miserable drizzle, their colors muted by the oppressive gray. And there were people, hundreds of them, students, he guessed, though their uniforms were drab and uniform. A sea of gray and white that offered no individuality. They were not looking at him. They were cowering, fleeing from a different kind of storm. A wave of uniformed figures, these ones distinguished by a single star on their collars, was sweeping through the courtyard with methodical brutality. They wielded oversized, cartoonishly violent weapons, massive spiked bats, clawed gauntlets, heavy truncheons. It was a scene of organized chaos, a vicious crackdown on the other students. Shouts of pain and fear were sharp against the rhythmic thud of blunt force on flesh. No late day, a voice boomed from unseen loudspeakers. A woman's voice, laced with cold, imperious authority. A core tenet of Honnuji Academy. Those who are tardy disrupt the systemic flow. They are a disease in the system, and like any disease, they must be purged. Let this be a lesson in discipline. Naruto's eyes narrowed. He had seen war. He had seen villages burn and soldiers die. But this was different. This was systemic, casual cruelty, inflicted upon children for the crime of being late. It was the petty tyranny of the strong, a philosophy he had dedicated his entire life to dismantling. His attention was drawn to a single point in the chaos. A young girl, no older than 10, with wide, terrified eyes, had tripped and fallen in her haste to flee. Her books and papers scattered across the wet concrete. She scrambled to gather them, her hands trembling. A squad of 3 one-star students, their faces twisted in cruel glee, descended upon her, raising their weapons. There was no hesitation in their movements. They were going to make an example of her. Naruto didn't think. He didn't strategize. He simply acted. From the perspective of the lead 1-star, a brutish young man with a bat studded with thick iron bolts, the world was simple. There was order, and there was chaos. He was an agent of order. The cowering girl was chaos. The equation was clear. He brought his bat down in a powerful, satisfying arc, aiming to crush the pavement an inch from her head to instill maximum terror. One moment, his target was a sobbing child on the gray concrete. The next, his vision was filled with shimmering, translucent gold. His bat passed through it as if it were a heat haze. There was no impact, no resistance, not even a whisper of displaced air. The golden shape, vaguely humanoid, had simply appeared between him and the girl. The other 2 attackers found the same thing. Their clawed gauntlet and heavy truncheon swung through the apparition, meeting only empty, rain-slicked air on the other side. They stumbled, their momentum carrying them forward, their minds reeling with a fundamental violation of physics. What they had seen was impossible. It wasn't there, but it was. Then the phantom solidified. Naruto stood to his full height, the faint golden aura of Kurama's chakra now burning with a steady, controlled intensity, pushing back the gloom and making the raindrops sizzle into steam before they could touch him. He hadn't moved to block the attacks. He had simply let them pass through his intangible form, a core application of his Kamui. He hadn't even looked at the attackers. His gaze was on the little girl, who was staring up at him, her terror momentarily replaced by sheer, uncomprehending awe. He offered her a small, reassuring smile, a flicker of the old, bright Naruto. "It's okay now," he said, his voice calm and steady, a rock in the storm of noise and fear. "You're safe." Then, he turned his attention to the three stunned students. His smile was gone, replaced by an expression of cold, utter disappointment. He moved, and it was as if the world had switched to a slower frame rate for everyone but him. The first boy, the one with the bat, was still off balance. Naruto's hand shot out, not in a fist, but with his fingers extended. He didn't strike the boy's face or chest. He tapped two precise points on his shoulder and elbow, at the complex junction of nerve and muscle that controlled the arm. The boy's arm went instantly limp, his grip vanishing. The heavy bat clattered to the ground. Before the boy could even register the loss of his weapon, Naruto's foot swept out, not kicking his legs, but tapping the back of his knee, buckling the joint and sending him collapsing into a heap, conscious but unable to rise. The second attacker, brandishing the clawed gauntlet, lunged forward with a roar of confused rage. Naruto sidestepped the clumsy charge with an almost lazy grace. As the student passed him, Naruto's hand gently chopped the side of his neck. It wasn't a killing blow. Not even a knockout blow. It was a precise strike to the vagus nerve, causing a momentary, disorienting shock to the boy's system. His vision swam, his legs turned to jelly, and he crumpled to the ground, gasping for air that was already in his lungs. The third, seeing his comrades fall in the span of 2 seconds without a single visible punch being thrown, hesitated. That was his mistake. Naruto closed the distance in a single, silent step, a golden blur that didn't seem to disturb the air. He didn't attack at all. He simply reached out and plucked the truncheon from the student's hand. His grip so firm and his movement so swift that the boy was left holding nothing but air, his fingers still curled around the memory of his weapon. Naruto looked him in the eye, his own blue eye filled with an ancient, weary authority. Then his left eyelid fluttered open. For a fraction of a second, the student stared into an abyss. He saw a crimson eye, containing not a pupil, but a spinning, three-bladed pinwheel surrounded by a pattern of impossible geometric complexity. It was the Mangekyo Sharingan. He didn't see a jutsu. He didn't fall into a genjutsu. He simply saw an infinitesimal glimpse of the power behind that eye, a power that could warp reality, and his mind, unable to process the sheer scale of it, shut down. He fainted, falling backwards onto the concrete with a dull thud. The entire engagement had lasted less than 5 seconds. A circle of silence spread out from Naruto's position, wider and more profound than the one his landing had created. The rain continued to fall, hissing against his chakra. The distant sounds of the crackdown faltered as more and more students, both aggressors and victims, stopped to stare at the impossible scene. He stood there, the unconscious or incapacitated forms of the 3 elite bullies at his feet, the terrified child now safely behind him, and the stolen truncheon held loosely in his hand. He hadn't broken a sweat. His breathing was even. He looked less like a warrior and more like a man who had been mildly inconvenienced. High above the courtyard, in the sterile white sanctum of the student council president's office, Satsuki Kuryuin lowered her high-powered binoculars. Her knuckles, gripping the delicate instrument, were white. Her usual expression of supreme, unshakable control was marred by a single, minute flaw. Her obsidian eyes were wider than they should be. The cup of premium Ceylon tea at her elbow sat forgotten, its steam long since vanished. "Interesting," she murmured, the word a so fort exhalation of breath in the quiet room. Her voice was a perfectly polished blade, but for the first time in a very long time, it held a trace of genuine surprise. Beside her, her most loyal retainers, the Elite Four, had witnessed the same event on the large monitors that dominated one wall. Ira Gamagori, the hulking chairman of the disciplinary committee, was aghast. Lady Satsuki, an unknown variable, he assaulted my committee members. He shows no fear. He wears no Goku uniform. This is an unprecedented breach of protocol. Allow me to go down there and personally chastise him. His voice was a booming explosion of righteous fury. At ease, Gamagori, Satsuki commanded, her voice cutting through his tirade like glass. She raised a hand, and the giant man fell silent instantly, though his body still quivered with restrained indignation. My, purred Nonanjakuzer, lounging elegantly on a plush sofa, a sly, intrigued smirk playing on her lips. He didn't make a sound. And that flashy golden light show, it's awfully gaudy, but you have to admit, it has flair. He took out Ira's trained apes without even scuffing his shoes. Huka Inamuda, his face obscured by the green glow of his laptop screen, was typing at a furious, inhuman speed. Data scrolled across his vision in dizzying columns. No energy signature consistent with life fibers. 0. His biological readings are anomalous. The energy output is off the charts, but its composition is unknown. I can't find him in any student database, any citizen registry, any criminal record. From a data perspective, Lady Satsuki, this man does not exist. Only Uzu Sanajiyama, leaning against a far wall with his arms crossed, showed a different reaction. A slow, predatory grin spread across his face. His movements, he said, his voice low and filled with a warrior's appreciation. There was no wasted motion. Perfect economy. Perfect precision. He's not just some brawler. That is a master. Satsuki ignored them all. Her focus was entirely on the figure in the courtyard. He was not a rebel like the transfer student she had been observing. The transfer student fought with rage, a blunt instrument of vengeance. This was different. This was control. Power so absolute it didn't need to be loud. He was not a piece on the board to be moved. He was a new, monolithic pillar that had just dropped from the heavens, racking the foundation of her perfectly designed game. He was a threat. He was a tool. He was an enigma, and Satsuki Karyuan did not tolerate enigmas in her kingdom. Meanwhile, on the other side of the courtyard, another battle had ground to a halt. Ryuko Matoi, her sailor uniform Kamui, Senketsu, pulsating with crimson energy, stood over the beaten forms of the tennis club. She had been a whirlwind of righteous fury, her half of a giant scissor blade a blur of red and steel. But even her rage-fueled momentum had been stopped dead by the golden spectacle. The hell, she breathed, her one visible eye wide with disbelief. Senketsu's single, large eye on her chest swiveled to focus on Naruto. Ryuko, be on guard, the uniform's gruff voice spoke in her mind. That power, it is not of a life fiber. It feels clean, ancient. I have never sensed anything like it. Ryuko stared at the boy. He was tall, blonde, and had an aura of calm confidence that was infuriatingly effortless. He had neutered at least 3 opponents in the time it took her to land a single punch, and he had done it with a grace that made her own brawling style feel clumsy and brutish. A spike of professional jealousy, hot and sharp, lanced through her. Who was this guy? Where did he come from? And what right did he have to steal the spotlight in her fight against Honnuji Academy? Back in the center of the courtyard, Naruto ignored the hundreds of eyes now fixed upon him. He knelt, turning his back on the rest of the world to face the little girl. He gently picked up one of her scattered books, a primer on basic mathematics. Its cover now smudged with grime, and handed it to her. Go on, he said softly. Get to class. I don't think anyone will bother you now. The girl, still speechless, nodded numbly. She gathered her things in a mad scramble, gave him one last look of hero worship, and then scurried away, melting back into the now hushed crowd. Only when she was gone did Naruto rise and finally survey the scene. He saw the sea of fearful, curious faces. He saw the enraged Gamagori beginning to descend the tower's massive external staircase. He saw Ryuko, a splash of defiant blue and red in the gray world, staring him down from across the yard. And he felt, more than saw, the piercing, analytical gaze from the peak of the tower. He met that gaze, looking up at the distant window, his blue eye clashing with an unseen force of will. It was in that moment of silent, long-distance confrontation that the loudspeakers crackled to life again. The same cold, imperious voice of Satsuki Kuryuin echoed across the vast, silent space. The drizzling rain its only accompaniment. This time, there was no grand philosophical pronouncement. There was only a single, direct, and absolute command, aimed not at the crowd, not at her enforcers, not at the other rebel. It was aimed directly at the eye of the storm. The anomaly in the courtyard. Identify yourself. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Fox, the Scissor, and the Queen. The command, delivered with the acoustic force of a collapsing glacier, left a vacuum in its wake. The hundreds of students in the rain-swept courtyard remained frozen, a petrified forest of gray uniforms. The world seemed to be holding its breath, all eyes locked onto the solitary, golden figure who had fractured their reality. Naruto felt the collective weight of their fear, their awe, and their expectation. He also felt the biting edge of the wind as it began to pick up, a cold, sharp blade that sliced through the damp air, whipping his blonde hair across his face and carrying the metallic tang of the acid rain. He did not answer the disembodied voice. Words were for conversations, and the voice from the tower was not inviting a dialogue. It was issuing a summons. Instead, he turned his gaze from the monolithic structure and took a step. The crowd recoiled as one, a synchronized, reflexive flinch. They parted before him like water before the bow of a ship, creating a wide, clear path leading towards the tower's base. He walked, his pace unhurried, his posture relaxed. The stolen truncheon in his hand felt alien, a crude piece of metal and plastic that had no place in his grip. With a casual flick of his wrist, he tossed it aside. It clattered onto the wet concrete with a sound that seemed deafening in the charged silence. From the tower's grand entrance, a figure descended the steps, moving with a ponderous, inexorable rhythm that shook the very ground. It was Ira Gamagori, his massive frame seeming to blot out what little light the sky offered. He was no longer quivering with rage, but encased in a shell of rigid, absolute discipline, his face a granite mask. He stopped 10 feet from Naruto, his shadow engulfing him completely. The sheer difference and their physical presence was staggering. Gamagori was a walking mountain, Naruto a lean silhouette. Lady Satsuki will see you now, Gamagori intoned, his voice a low rumble like grinding stones. It was not a request. Naruto simply nodded, his blue eye meeting the giant's gaze without a flicker of intimidation. He fell into step behind the disciplinary committee chairman, ascending the wide, imposing staircase. The journey was one of calculated psychological pressure. The interior of Honnuji Academy was even more oppressive than its exterior. The corridors were vast, stark, and unnervingly clean, fashioned from polished black stone and cold steel. There were no decorations, no student art, no sign of life or warmth. It was a sterile artery leading to a heart of pure authority, the right. HMIC stomp of Gamagori's boots the only sound. A fortress designed to crush the spirit long before the body, Kurama observed from the quiet depths of Naruto's mind. The fox's cynicism was a familiar counterpoint to Naruto's own observations. She builds her nest high, like a predator, forcing all others to approach as supplicants. A classic tactic of the arrogant. Arrogance requires an overestimation of one's own abilities. Naruto thought back, his eyes scanning every detail of the architecture, the placement of the guards, the faint hum of energy in the walls. This isn't arrogance, it's confidence. She has the power to back this up. That makes her dangerous, not foolish. They reached a lift, a simple platform of polished steel with no visible doors or controls. Gamagori stepped onto it and turned. Naruto followed, standing opposite him as the platform began to ascend with a silent, stomach-lurching velocity. The walls of the lift shaft were a blur of gray concrete. The ride was designed to disorient, to make one feel small and powerless as they were delivered upwards into the sanctum of the ruler. Naruto, who had ridden the giant fists of the 10 tails and leapt between dimensions, simply stood with his hands in his pockets, his expression one of mild curiosity. His absolute calm seemed to irritate Gamagori more than any act of defiance could have. The platform slowed to a halt, opening into a hallway of pure, blinding white. The floor, walls, and ceiling were seamless, reflecting the cold, flat light of hidden fixtures. At the far end stood a pair of massive, 20-foot tall doors of the same immaculate white, marked only by two simple black handles. Gamagori led him to the threshold, then stopped. "She will see you alone," he stated, and with a final, withering glare. He turned and descended back into the depths of the school, leaving Naruto in the silent, sterile antechamber. Naruto regarded the doors for a moment, then pushed them open. They swung inward with a surprising lack of weight, revealing the room beyond. It was less an office and more a throne room at the top of the world. The far wall was a single, colossal pane of reinforced glass, offering a panoramic, godlike view of Honnuji Academy and the sprawling, gray city beyond. The oppressive sky felt closer here, a tangible ceiling pressing down on the world she commanded. The room itself was a study in minimalist tyranny. The floor was a polished, reflective white that mirrored the ceiling. There was no clutter, no personal effects, no sign of human frailty. The only furniture was a single, enormous desk of what looked like obsidian, polished to a mirror shine, and two stark, uncomfortable-looking chairs placed before it. And behind the desk, seated in a high-backed chair hat was more a throne than an office seat, was Satsuki Karyuan. She was pouring tea. The act was one of serene, deliberate precision, the stream of amber liquid flowing from a delicate porcelain pot into a matching cup without a single wasted motion. She did not look up as he entered. She simply completed her task, set the pot down, and raised the cup to her lips, her movements imbued with an unshakable, regal poise. The Elite Four were present, positioned strategically around the room. Nanan Jakuzer was perched on the edge of a windowsill, looking bored and amused. Uzu Sanajiyama leaned against a wall, his arms crossed, his eyes alight with a warrior's intensity. Huka Inamuta stood near the desk, his face bathed in the glow of a holographic data screen only he could see. They were pieces on her board, positioned for support and intimidation. Naruto walked into the center of the room, the soft soles of his shinobi sandals making no sound on the polished floor. He stopped 10 feet from her desk and waited, his presence a quiet but profound disruption to the room's sterile order. The biting wind howled outside the massive window, its mournful sound the only thing that filled the silence as she took a slow, deliberate sip of her tea. Finally, she placed the cup down with a soft click and fixed her gaze on him. Her eyes were like chips of volcanic glass, sharp and deep, and they held an intelligence that was as intimidating as her physical presence. "You have caused a significant disruption to the operational efficiency of my academy," she began, her voice the same cold, clear tone from the loudspeakers. It was a statement of fact, not an accusation. "You assaulted members of my disciplinary committee. You defied a school-wide mandate. And you wield a power that is not registered, not recognized, and not derived from a Goku uniform. I will have an explanation." Naruto met her gaze, his own expression unreadable. "Some of your students were about to hurt a child for being late. I stopped them." His voice was calm, the statement deceptively simple. Satsuki's eyebrow arched. "A minute, fractional movement. Discipline is the bedrock upon which society is built. Fear is the tool by which discipline is maintained. The weak, the tardy, the inefficient, they are a disease. By coddling one, you threaten the health of the entire organism. Your sentimentality is a weakness. Fear breeds hatred," Naruto countered, his voice losing none of its calm. "And hatred leads to needless destruction. I've seen empires built on fear crumble to dust because they had no foundation. A true leader inspires loyalty, not terror. They protect the weak, because they know that the strength of the many comes from the well-being of every single one, not just the strong." He felt a ichor of something in her, a tightening of the jaw so slight it would have been invisible to a normal eye. But to his Sharingan, which he had subtly activated, it was a flare of light in the dark. He wasn't just hearing her words. He was seeing her. He saw the minute tension in the muscles of her neck, the fractional increase in her blink rate, the almost imperceptible way she shifted her weight in her chair. She was a fortress of composure, but he could see the hairline cracks in the walls. "An intriguing, if naive, philosophy," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "And what is the source of the power you use to enforce this philosophy? That golden light, your ability to become intangible. It is not life fibers." It was not a question. She was daring him to lie. "Let's just call it my life's energy," Naruto replied, offering a slight, disarming shrug. Everyone has it. Most just don't know how to use it. Inamuda scoffed, his fingers flying across his holographic keyboard. Impossible. His energy signature has no correlation with standard human biosignatures. The output during his brief intervention was measured in petajoules. It is an anomaly. An anomaly I can't explain in a way you'd understand, Naruto said, turning his gaze to Inamuda. Trying to measure it with your machines is like trying to measure the ocean with a teacup. You'll get a reading, but you'll miss the point entirely. His gaze shifted back to Satsuki. My power is my own. Where I come from is not a place you've ever heard of. My objective, for now, is to find a way back. And my philosophy, as you call it, is not up for debate. I will not stand by and watch the strong brutalize the weak. Not for you, not for anyone. Each sentence was a perfectly placed stone, building a wall against her interrogation. He wasn't being defiant in a way she could punish. He wasn't shouting or posturing. He was simply stating his reality, and his calm assertion of it was a more profound challenge to her authority than any open rebellion. Satsuki's eyes narrowed. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. You stand in the heart of my domain, an unknown entity with inexplicable power. And you declare your intention to defy my rule based on childish idealism. That is not confidence. That is foolishness. Is it? Naruto took a step forward, a casual movement that made Sanjiang. A tense and Gamagori, who had re-entered the room to stand guard by the door, clench his fists. You think fear makes people strong. You're wrong. It makes them predictable. I've fought alongside people who were terrified, who knew they were outmatched, but they stood their ground to protect their friends. They fought for their bonds. That is a strength your philosophy cannot comprehend and your uniforms cannot replicate. You want to rule through fear. Fine, but don't be surprised when the people you've terrorized decide they'd rather burn your kingdom to the ground than live in it. He was channeling years of war, of loss, of seeing villages rise and fall, into his words. He spoke of the will of fire without naming it, of the bonds that had defeated gods. His gaze never left hers, and with his Sharingan, he saw her reaction. She wasn't angry. She was intrigued, annoyed, yes, but beneath the annoyance was a flicker of fascination. He was an unsolvable equation, and Satsuki Karyuin lived to solve equations. She fell silent for a long moment, her long, slender fingers tapping a slow, rhythmic beat on the surface of her obsidian desk. The only sound was the wind and that soft, repetitive tap. Your power is significant, she said at last, changing tactics. Her voice was smoother now, the blade sheathed. But it is wasted without a grander purpose. You speak of protecting the weak, a noble goal for a single man. I seek to protect all of humanity, to reshape it, to force its evolution so that it may survive the trials to come. Your power could be a scalpel in my hand, carving a better future. It is a purpose far greater than simply finding your way home. She leaned forward, her eyes glinting. Serve me, Naruto Uzumaki. She had learned his name from Inamuda's data gathering, a subtle way of showing she already knew more than she let on. And I will give you a place of honor in the new world order I am forging. It was the offer of a queen to a wandering knight. Power, purpose, belonging. Naruto almost smiled. Almost. Thanks, but no thanks, he said, his tone final. I don't serve anyone's ambition. My purpose is my own. I protect people, not ideologies. And from where I'm standing, your new world order looks a lot like the old world orders I had to tear down. He turned his back on her, the ultimate act of disrespect in this temple of her power, and began to walk toward the doors. You are making a grave error. Satsuki's voice followed him, laced with cold steel. In my world, if you are not with me, you are against me. You will learn that soon enough. Naruto paused at the door but didn't turn around. I'm not against you, Satsuki Karyuin, he said over his shoulder. Not yet. I'm just not for you. There's a difference. You should learn it. He walked out, the great white doors swinging shut behind him, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. The biting wind was a welcome shock after the sterile atmosphere of the tower. Naruto found himself on a high rooftop several blocks away from the academy, the city sprawling out before him like a circuit board of gray concrete and flickering neon. The sun was beginning its descent, but the thick, smoggy cloud cover diffused the light. painting the world in dreary shades of purple and orange. He sat on the ledge, his legs dangling over the dizzying drop, and let the wind whip around him. She is more dangerous than she appears. Kurama mused. Her will is like tempered steel. And she speaks of trials to come. She knows something about the parasitic energy that chokes this world. I know, Naruto thought, his eyes tracing the paths of the automated cargo trains that snaked through the city. She's fighting a war, but not the one she's showing everyone. Honnuji Academy, it's not a school. It's a weapon factory, and the students are her army. He sighed, a plume of white breath snatched away by the wind. He was a warrior in a world whose rules he didn't understand, fighting a battle he hadn't chosen. He was alone, a stranger on a hostile shore. Meanwhile, in the grimy underbelly of the city, Ryuko Matoi kicked a stack of empty crates, sending them scattering across a slick, garbage-strewn alley. Damn it, she swore, punching the brick wall. The pain was a dull throb, nothing compared to the hot, stinging frustration in her chest. Calm yourself, Ryuko, Senketsu's voice resonated in her head. Your anger is making you sloppy. That man, he is not our primary objective. Satsuki Karaiyuan is. He made a fool of me. Ryuko shot back, pacing like a caged tiger. He just waltzed in, played the big hero, and got a personal invitation from the queen bee herself. While I'm down here kicking garbage cans. Who the hell is he? She had spent the last hour intimidating sniveling no-stars and shaking down local thugs. The Golden Ghost, they called him. The Anomaly. He had left the tower over an hour ago, and then vanished. But Ryuko was nothing if not persistent. She followed the whispers, the fearful rumors. A breadcrumb trail of awe and terror that led her deeper into the labyrinthine downtown district, a place where the Academy's iron fist was felt a little less acutely. She was hunting, and the frustration was only sharpening her instincts. She found him in a narrow alleyway choked with the steam from ramen stalls and the lurid glow of buzzing neon signs. He was just standing there, looking at a faded poster on a wall, his back to her. He seemed completely at ease, a pocket of impossible calm in the city's chaotic heart. You, she shouted, her voice echoing off the brick walls. Naruto turned slowly, his expression not of surprise, but of mild resignation, as if he'd been expecting her. Can I help you? Yeah, you can start by telling me who the hell you are, she snarled, stalking towards him. Her hand gripping the handle of her scissor blade. You think you can just show up here, steal my thunder, and play the mysterious hero? This is my fight, my revenge. I don't need some flashy blonde pretty boy getting in my way. Naruto raised an eyebrow. Your fight, it looked to me like a one-sided beatdown where you were one of the people getting beaten. And I wasn't playing hero. I was stopping bullies. Ryuko's temper, always a short fuse, finally ignited. That's it, she roared. Life fiber override. Kamui Senketsu. The transformation was instantaneous and violent. Her sailor uniform exploded outwards, straps and armor plating clamping down on her body in a wave of crimson energy. Senketsu was battle-ready, his single eye glaring with furious light. The alley, already narrow, seemed to shrink around her immense presence. I'm gonna beat some answers out of you, she yelled, and lunged. She was a blur of motion, the massive scissor blade cleaving the air with a vicious whoosh. It was aimed directly at his neck, a killing blow meant to force a reaction. Naruto didn't move, he didn't flinch, he just watched the blade come. Ryuko's eyes wid, and in shock as the sharpened steel edge passed harmlessly through his neck. There was no blood, no sound of impact, just the bizarre, physics-defying image of the solid blade occupying the same space as his body. He was like a projection, a ghost of golden light. Before she could process this impossibility, he moved. As the blade passed through him, he solidified his hand, catching the flat of the weapon with a soft clang. His grip was absolute. He leaned in close, his blue eye examining the blade, the crimson fibers of Senketsu, and Ryuko herself with a calm, analytical intensity. He was gathering data. Incredible, he murmured, his voice barely a whisper. This energy, it's alive. It's bonded to you. You're not just wearing it. You're partners. His complete lack of fear, his clinical analysis in the face of her ultimate attack, was more infuriating than any counterattack could have been. With a roar of frustration, she tried to wrench the blade free, but his grip was like iron. With a flick of his wrist that seemed to defy her strength, he disarmed her. The scissor blade flew from her grasp, spun in the air, and he caught it, holding it for a moment before casually tossing it back to her. It clattered at her feet. The message was clear: I am so far beyond you that this isn't even a fight. Ryuko stared at him, trembling with a mixture of rage and a cold, creeping dread. Who was this man? Hallelujah! The shriek came from the mouth of the alley, a sound of such pure, unadulterated, nonsensical glee that it shattered the tension like a pane of glass. Meiko Menkenshoku stood there, her arms spread wide, her eyes sparkling. It's just like the time my grandma tried to swat a cockroach in the kitchen. Meiko began, launching into one of her signature monologues at hyperspeed, complete with dramatic poses and wild gestures. The cockroach was super fast, zipping and zooming all over the place, and Grandma was getting angrier and angrier, whacking the counter with a rolled-up newspaper. Whack, whack, whack. She missed every time, and the cockroach, it just stood there, wiggling its little antennae, and it felt like it was laughing. So Grandma got a brilliant idea. She decided to become one with the newspaper, to feel its flow, to anticipate the cockroach's next move. But then Dad came in and stepped on it. It was very tragic. But the point is, Ryuko, you're Grandma and he's the cockroach, and I think if you just stop trying to hit him maybe you can have a nice chat. The sheer, unadulterated absurdity of the speech was a force of nature. Ryuko stood there, her jaw slack, Senketsu's transformation slowly receding in her confusion. The murderous rage had completely evaporated, replaced by utter bewilderment. Naruto stared at Meiko, his head tilted. He watched her entire, impassioned performance, a whirlwind of flailing limbs and earnest nonsense. And then, for the first time since he had crashed into this miserable, gray world, his stoic, war-hardened facade cracked. A low chuckle escaped his lips, and then a genuine, warm, amused smile spread across his face. It was a startling transformation, lighting up his features and revealing a glimpse of the charismatic, bright-eyed boy he had once been. Ryuko stared. The smile changed everything. It took him from an intimidating, otherworldly monster to a person. A young man who could be amused by her ridiculous best friend. The moment passed. Naruto's smile faded into a more neutral expression, but the warmth lingered in his eyes. He looked at Ryuko, his tone no longer distant, but frank. She's right, you know, he said. Your anger is your fuel, but it's also your blindfold. You're strong, but you're sloppy. He nodded towards the tower, a dark spire against the bruised twilight sky. You can't beat her like that. He took a step back, melting into the shadows of the alley. I'm not your enemy, Ryuko Matoi. But I'm not her soldier, either. I have my own path. If yours crosses with mine in a way that helps people, fine. If it doesn't, he paused, letting the implication hang in the air. Stay out of my way. Before she could form a reply, he was gone. Not with a burst of speed, by simply fading into the deepening darkness, leaving behind a bewildered, angry, and strangely intrigued Ryuko, a cheerfully oblivious Meiko, and the lingering scent of ozone and ramen in the cold night air. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. Threads of a Forgotten Art. The echoes of his own declaration faded into the neon-drenched alley, leaving a silence that was thick with questions. Ryuko's bewilder, Ed fury and Mako's cheerful innocence were a stark, chaotic diptych, a snapshot of the world he now found himself in. Naruto didn't wait for a response. He turned, and with a dancer's grace, vaulted onto a rusted dumpster. Then to a fire escape, and from there to the rooftops. He moved with a silent, fluid purpose, a phantom dissolving into the urban geometry of darkness and flickering light. He needed elevation. He needed perspective. He needed to think. He found his perch atop an old, skeletal water tower on the roof of a derelict textile factory, a relic from a time before REVOCS monopolized the very concept of clothing. From here, the city was a breathtaking, monstrous tapestry. The colossal spire of Honnuji Academy dominated the skyline, a black spear aimed at the heart of the bruised, smoggy heavens. Below, the city sprawled out, a glowing grid of life and desperation, its arteries clogged with traffic, its veins glowing with the cheap, lurid light of countless signs. The biting wind was stronger up here, a mournful dirge that whipped at his jacket and carried the smells of the city: wet asphalt, fried noodles, industrial waste, and the ever-present, faint chemical tang of tea. He polluted rain that had begun to fall again, a fine, misting drizzle this time. He sat on the edge of the rusted platform, legs dangling over the precipice, and closed his eyes. He shut out the cacophony of the city, the distant sirens, the hum of electricity, the collective murmur of a million lives. He let his consciousness expand, sinking downwards, past the concrete and steel, past the bedrock, and into the very lifeblood of the planet. He activated Sage Mode, not as a tool for combat, but as a listening device of unimaginable sensitivity. The sickness was worse than he'd thought. It was a planetary fever. He could feel the natural energy of the Earth, a deep, slow, and powerful rhythm, but it was being suppressed, choked by the parasitic presence he had sensed earlier. He focused on that alien frequency, that dissonant screech in the symphony of life. It was not a uniform blanket of energy. It had structure. It was a web, a colossal, globe-spanning network of threads, some dormant and faint, others active and pulsing with a hungry, voracious light. The entire city of Honnu was a nexus, a point of agonizing concentration, with the Academy Tower as its epicenter, a malignant tumor pumping poison into the web. It's like a root system. Kurama's thoughts merged with his own, the fox's millennia of experience providing a grim metaphor. The roots are ancient, dormant, but is Satsuki woman. She has found a way to tap into them, to draw up their sap and weave it into her tools of control. These Goku uniforms, they are not just armor. They are leeches. Naruto pushed his senses deeper, following the threads as they converged beneath the city. He ignored the main conduit leading to the academy, that was the heart of the beast, too well defended to approach blindly. Instead, he sought out the lesser tributaries, the older, more forgotten pathways. He found one, a deep, cold channel of energy, sluggish and faint, running through the labyrinthine depths far below the city streets. It felt old, neglected. It was a place to start, a thread to pull. With a final, sweeping glance across the cityscape, he stood up. His objective was set. He leapt from the water tower, not falling, but gliding. Using his chakra to lighten his body and control his descent, he landed silently in an alleyway 3 blocks away, a ghost returning to the shadows. The journey into the city's substructure was a descent into a forgotten world. He moved through the backstreets, a wraith in the periphery of vision. The rain grew heavier, plastering his hair to his brow and reflecting the neon signs in shimmering, distorted puddles on the ground. He passed a REVOCS patrol, 2 guards in sleek, corporate-sponsored armor, their faces hidden behind impersonal visors. They were harassing a street vendor, kicking over his cart of cheap trinkets. Naruto's hands clenched for a moment, the instinct to intervene a fiery pulse in his gut. But he suppressed it. A street-level fight would draw attention. His current hunt was more important. He tossed a small, chakra-infused stone against a metal shutter halfway down the street. It struck with a loud clang. The guards spun around, instantly alert, moving to investigate the sound. By the time they turned back, the space where Naruto had been was empty. He found the entrance he was looking for, a dilapidated, sealed-off subway station from a bygone era. The sign, faded and peeling, read, Shitamaki Line. The entrance was blocked by a corrugated steel gate, rusted shut and secured with a heavy chain. For Naruto, it was no obstacle. He placed his hands on the gate, and for a fraction of a second, his body shimmered. He passed through the solid metal as if it were a curtain of smoke, his Kamui phasing him into the darkness beyond. The air that hit him was thick, cold, and heavy with the smell of decay. It was a potent cocktail of damp concrete, pervasive mold, and the unmistakable scent of stagnant water. The only light came from the entrance behind him, casting his long shadow down a flight of crumbling stairs. He descended into the abyss, his senses on high alert. The station below was a mausoleum of a dead era. Faded, peeling advertisements on the walls depicted smiling families promoting products and brands that likely no longer existed. A thick layer of dust and grime covered everything. The tracks were submerged in several inches of murky, foul-smelling water. It was utterly silent, save for the rhythmic plink, plonk, of water dripping from the ceiling into the gloom. He didn't need light. His senses, a fusion of his own, Kurama's, and the sage's, painted a vivid picture of the world around him. He could feel the vibrations of the dripping water, the faint scuttling of rats in the walls, the subtle currents of air moving through the tunnels. And he could feel the thread of parasitic energy, stronger now, a cold, sluggish river flowing deeper into the tunnel system. He began to walk, his footsteps making no sound as he moved along the edge of the submerged tracks. The tunnels were a claustrophobic labyrinth. They twisted and turned, some sections collapsed, forcing him to phase through tons of rubble. The alien energy grew more potent with every step. He began to see physical manifestations of it. Strange, phosphorescent fungi that pulsed with a faint, sickly purple light, clinging to the walls in patches. They were dead, nothing more than fossilized remnants, but Naruto could sense the echo of the same parasitic energy within them. Early experiments, perhaps, or natural growths of this world's blight. He had been walking for what felt like an hour when he sensed it. A subtle shift in the air currents behind him. A vibration in the floor that didn't match the rhythm of the dripping water. A flicker of killing intent. So faint and controlled that a lesser sensor might have missed it entirely. He was being followed. Not REVOCS, Kurama noted. Their energy signature is clumsy, loud. This is different, quieter, more disciplined. Naruto didn't break his stride. He continued walking, his posture relaxed, feigning ignorance. He let his pursuer think they had the element of surprise. He followed the tunnels into a vast, open cavern, a former maintenance junction where multiple tunnels converged. The ceiling was high, lost in the oppressive darkness above. The center of the cavern was dominated by the skeletal remains of old train cars, rusted and derelict. It was a perfect place for an ambush. He walked right into the middle of it. The attack came from all directions at once. 6 kunai knives, trailing thin, almost invisible wires, shot out of the darkness, aimed to pin his limbs. Simultaneously, several small, explosive tags, tossed with pinpoint accuracy, landed in a circle around his feet. It was a classic shinobi trap, designed to immobilize and annihilate. Naruto didn't even seem to speed up. He simply flowed, with a series of movements that were too fast and fluid to be human. He plucked each of the 6 kunai out of the air, the attached wires wrapping harmlessly around his forearms. In the same motion, he used his chakra-infused feet to kick each of the explosive tags upwards, sending them hurtling towards the ceiling. They detonated high above with a series of sharp cracks and flashes of light, revealing, for a brief second, a shadowy figure leaping down from the rusted scaffolding above. The figure was cloaked in traditional shinobi shozoku, a dark gray that blended perfectly with the gloom. They were fast, landing in a silent crouch, a short, gleaming blade, a tanto, held in a reverse grip. They moved with a lethal grace, a predator in their element. "You reek of the woven's filth," a voice hissed, feminine and sharp with venom. "Another of the queen's abominations, sent to defile our sacred ground." She charged. She was a blur of motion, her tanto a flicker of deadly light. She feinted high, then swept low, aiming to sever his Achilles tendon. Naruto simply took a small step back, the blade missing by a millimeter. He watched her movements with his Sharingan, every tense muscle, every subtle shift of weight, every spark of chakra, fa. Int and diluted as it was, laid bare before him. He saw her style. It was a pure, unadulterated form of traditional ninjutsu, but it was incomplete. It was like reading a master's manuscript with half the pages torn out. She spun, transitioning from the failed slash into a rapid series of hand signs. Serpent, ram, monkey. The signs were correct, but her chakra molding was flawed, inefficient. Kaden. Gokaku no Jutsu. She whispered. A small, sputtering ball of fire, barely the size of his fist, shot from her lips. It was a pathetic imitation of the grand technique it was meant to be, yet she wielded it with the desperate conviction of someone using their ultimate weapon. Naruto didn't even bother to dodge. He held up his open palm, and the fireball splashed against it, extinguishing with a soft pfft and a cloud of steam. His hand was completely unscathed. The girl's visible eye, the only part of her face not covered by her mask, widened in shock. That was her clan's most powerful offensive technique. It should have at least scorched him. He gave her no time to recover. He moved, not with the overwhelming speed of his Kyuubi mode, but with the precise, controlled grace of a true master of taijutsu. He flowed around her guard, his hands a blur. He didn't strike her. He tapped her. A gentle tap on her wrist caused her fingers to go numb, her tanto clattering to the floor. Another tap on her shoulder threw her off balance. A final, soft touch to the back of her neck sent a paralyzing jolt through her system. She froze mid-motion, unable to move, her body locked in place by his precise application of nerve strikes. She was completely helpless, yet completely unharmed. He bent down and picked up her tanto, examining the craftsmanship. It was old, the steel folded many times, but well maintained. He stood before her, the faint glow from the smoldering explosive tags on the ceiling casting flickering shadows across his face. Those hand signs, the substitution technique you were preparing to use if your trap failed. The very name of that fire jutsu, he said, his voice low and serious, devoid of any malice. That is the sacred art of my homeland. An art that should be possible for anyone in this world to know. He looked her directly in the eye, his gaze intense. Tell me, where did you learn the ways of the shinobi? His question struck her with the force of a physical blow. Her rigid, hostile posture crumbled, replaced by stunned, slack-jawed disbelief. The anger in her eye was extinguished, replaced by a torrent of confusion. The legends, the ancient scrolls, they spoke of a homeland. A source of their power, a place lost to myth. And this man, this anomaly who reeked of the enemy but moved with the grace of their first master, spoke of it as if he had just left it yesterday. Slowly, reluctantly, she led him deeper into the tunnels. The paralysis wore off, but the fight had been thoroughly beaten out of her. She guided him to what looked like a dead end, a solid wall of rock and concrete. She pressed her hand against a specific spot, channeling a tiny, precise amount of her faint chakra into it. With a low groan of grinding stone, a section of the wall slid aside, revealing a brightly lit, modern corridor that was utterly at odds with the surrounding decay. The air inside was cool, dry, and smelled of ozone and hot electronics. They emerged into a startling sight, a repurposed, multi-car subway train, stationary but humming with power. Its sides had been modified with armored plating and sensor arrays. Wires and cables snaked from it, connecting to a vast array of humming servers and computer terminals. This was no simple hideout. This was a mobile command center. Several figures in the main car looked up as they entered. One was a King man with a pink mohawk and a scowl permanently etched on his face. The other was a man in a pristine white suit, his blonde hair perfectly coiffed. Rin, you're back. Did you find the source of the energy surge? The man in the suit asked, his voice smooth and theatrical. Then he saw Naruto, and he froze. And who, pray tell, is this? Before Rin could answer, the man's eyes widened with a sudden, dramatic realization. Wait, don't tell me, the energy signature, the raw power, the sheer, overwhelming presence. It's you. He struck a dramatic pose, pointing a finger at Naruto. You are the anomaly that has thrown Honnuji into chaos. Then, in a movement so fast it was almost a blur, he shed his suit. It flew off him in pieces, revealing a perfectly sculpted, muscular physique, adorned only with a pair of glowing pink suspenders and a matching belt. A series of lights on his chest began to glow. Behold, he boomed, his voice echoing in the confined space. My radiant form is proof of my commitment to exposing the truth. I am Ikaro Mikasugi, and this is Nudist Beach. Naruto stared, his expression utterly deadpan. The hulking man with the mohawk face palmed. Rin looked like he wanted the ground to swallow her whole. Well, Kurama's dry voice echoed in Naruto's head. And I thought Jiraiya was weird. Put your clothes on, Naruto said flatly, not even blinking. We have things to discuss. The discussion that followed was a tense, revelation-filled debriefing. Ikaro, having reluctantly redressed, explained the nature of their organization. Nudist Beach was a paramilitary resistance group dedicated to fighting Ragyo Kuraiyuan and the threat of the life fibers. Rin, now unmasked and revealed to be a young woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and a proud, defiant posture, explained her own piece of the puzzle. Her clan, the Kageyama, were descendants of a small group of shinobi who had been flung into this world through a freak accident centuries ago. They had discovered the life fibers, which they called Ito Bakemono, or thread monsters, and had waged a secret, generational war against them. But cut off from the homeland, their connection to chakra had grown weaker with every passing generation. Their techniques were hollow echoes of the real thing. They had the knowledge, but not the power. "We thought you were a covers unit," Ikaro explained, his demeanor now serious and analytical. "A new type of life fiber weapon. We've never detected an energy signature like yours. It's biological, symbiotic, but it's not parasitic. It's harmonious." To prove his point, Naruto held out his hand. He focused, molding his chakra, the pure, potent energy of his own life force mixed with Kurama's. A perfect, swirling sphere of brilliant blue energy materialized in his palm, spinning with a quiet, contained power. The Rasengan. The effect on the room was profound. Ikaro stared, his scientific mind racing, sweat beading on his forehead. Incredible, pure, stable, self-contained energy, the theoretical possibilities. Sumugu Kanagas, the man with the pink mohawk, looked on with hostile suspicion, his hand gripping the handle of his sewing machine-like weapon. But it was Rin who had the strongest reaction. She stared at the Rasengan, her eyes wide with a mixture of emotions Naruto knew all too well: awe at the sight of true power, shame at her own clan's weakness, and the faintest, most fragile spark of nascent hope. Everything she had been taught, every legend her elders had passed down about the glorious power of their ancestors, was real. And it was right in front of her. You are a living Rosetta Stone," Ikaro breathed, his earlier theatrics gone, replaced by the raw excitement of a scientist on the verge of a paradigm-shifting discovery. "You are the key to understanding life fibers, to fighting them, perhaps even to defeating them." He looked at Naruto, his eyes gleaming. "We need your help. We have the technology, the intelligence network, the soldiers. But you have the one thing we lack. You have the power to fight these monsters on their own level." Naruto let the Rasengan dissipate, the energy fading back into his system. He looked from Ikaro's desperate, hopeful face to Rin's complex, conflicted gaze. He was still a stranger here. But for the first time, he was not alone. He had found others who knew the enemy. An alliance was logical, necessary. "I'll help you," Naruto said, his voice steady. "But let's be clear, I am not your soldier. I am not your weapon. I am your ally. I fight by my own code, on my own terms." He looked pointedly at Rin. "And I'll need a guide. Someone who understands this city's shadows and this world's secret history." Ikaro grinned, a plan already forming behind his eyes. "Of course, an ally, Rin. From this moment on, you are his official liaison to Nudist Beach. You will assist him in any way he requires." Rin stiffened, her pride warring with her duty. To be ignorant as a glorified tour guide to this powerful, enigmatic outsider was an insult. But to refuse was to deny her clan the best chance they'd had in centuries to reclaim their legacy. She gave Naruto a sharp, resentful nod. "As you command." Quote. A new, tense status quo had been forged in the darkness beneath the city. Naruto now had a foothold in this world's secret war, and a reluctant shadow with a forgotten art at his side. The threads of fate were beginning to weave a new pattern. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. Symphony of Destruction, Ballad of Connection. The first tri-annual Naturals election of Honnuji Academy was less a school event and more a public ritual of social Darwinism. It was a day when the brutal, unspoken hierarchy of the school was made explicit, written in the language of violence for all to see. The entire student body, tens of thousands strong, was crammed into a colossal, open-air arena that seemed carved from the very bones of the mountain upon which the academy stood. The air, already thick with the usual smog, was now electric with a mixture of bloodthirsty excitement and palpable terror. It smelled of ozone, cheap popcorn, and sweat. Naruto stood in the upper tiers, the section grudgingly assigned to the no stars, the uniform-less chaff of the student body. The concrete benches were cracked and cold, and the view was partially obstructed by massive steel girders. It was a calculated architectural insult, designed to reinforce their worthlessness. Beside him, Kageyama Rin stood ramrod straight, her arms crossed, her expression a mask of stoic contempt. She wore a simple, dark gray hooded jacket and pants, blending in perfectly with the drab no-star crowd, yet she stood out like a hawk in a flock of pigeons. "A perversion of combat," she muttered, her voice low enough for only him to hear over the roar of the crowd. "They mistake spectacle for skill and brutality for strength. They fight for status and fabric, not for survival or honor. It is decadent. It's a recruitment drive, Naruto corrected quietly, his eyes scanning the arena not as a spectator, but as a strategist. His sage mode was active, a low-level hum beneath his consciousness had allowed him to feel the thrum of the crowd, the pulsing energy of the Goku uniforms below, and the singular, immense pressure of Satsuki Karyuan's will presiding over it all from her throne high above. She's not just culling the weak. She's identifying the ambitious, the ones who will claw their way to the top, no matter the cost. Those are the soldiers she wants. Rin fell silent, considering his words. From her perspective, born from a clan waging a secret, desperate war for survival, this gaudy tournament was an absurdity. From his, a veteran of a continental war fought with child soldiers. It was a chillingly familiar and effective form of mobilization. A deafening fanfare of brass and drums erupted from the massive speakers, and Satsuki Karyuan's voice, amplified to godlike proportions, silenced the arena. "Students of Honnuji Academy," she declared, her voice cutting through the air like a diamond. "Today, you are granted an opportunity to redefine your existence. Your station in life is not fixed. It is a prize to be seized. The clothes you wear, the food you eat, the respect you are afforded, all of it is determined by your own power. Show me your ambition. Show me your strength. Let the first naturals election commence." The arena exploded in a deafening roar. On the battlefield below, dozens of one-on-one fights erupted simultaneously. It was a whirlwind of chaos and violence. The combatants were mostly 1-stars, their Goku uniforms granting them enhanced strength and speed. Fights were brutish, artless, and swift. A student from the boxing club, his fists encased in oversized, star-emblazoned gloves, would deliver a single, devastating punch that sent his opponent flying, their uniform shredding apart in a flash of red light as its life fibers were severed. The loser, now a no-star, would be dragged from the arena in disgrace. The winner would absorb their uniform's remnants, their own star glowing slightly brighter. It was a microcosm of the Academy's philosophy: consume or be consumed. Naruto watched it all with a detached, analytical gaze. His Sharingan was active, its crimson glimmer hidden by the shadow of his hair. He wasn't watching the fights themselves, but the energy within them. He could see the flow of the life fibers, the way they writhed and pulsed within the uniforms, responding to the wearer's will, feeding on their blood and ambition. Crude but effective, Kurama noted, his voice a low grumble of grudging respect in Naruto's mind. They've harnessed the parasite, turned its hunger into a source of power. A dangerous game. A leech does not care for the health of its host, only for the richness of its blood. As the weaker students were weeded out, the Elite Four took to the field, each entering their designated fighting zone to face the 7 strongest challengers who had emerged from the initial melee. The atmosphere in the arena shifted. This was the main event. Ira Gamagori was a fortress of absolute defense, his shackle regalia absorbing every blow dealt to him before unleashing it back tenfold. Uzu Sanejiyama, his blade regalia turning him into a whirlwind of bamboo swords, was a storm of blindingly fast strikes. Huka Inamuta was a phantom of data, his probe regalia analyzing his opponent's movements in microseconds to predict and counter their every move. They were all masters of their respective disciplines. But it was Nanan Jakuzer who truly captured Naruto's attention. Her entrance was a performance. She didn't walk onto the field. She was carried on a platform by her marching band, the stirring, bombastic notes of her personal theme song announcing her arrival. Her uniform, the symphony regalia, was a garish, magnificent creation of speakers, pipes, and cannons, with a giant bass drum on her back and a conductor's shako on her head. She faced her 7 opponents with a look of supreme, bored arrogance. "All right, you tone-deaf troglodytes," she announced into her baton microphone, her voice dripping with saccharine contempt. "Let's get this over with. I have a rehearsal in an hour, and unlike you lot, my performance actually matters." The battle was a masterclass in ranged, area of effect warfare. She didn't engage in physical combat. She conducted. With a flick of her baton, a wave of concussive sonic force would erupt from the speakers on her shoulders, sending her opponents staggering back. A high-pitched, piercing note from the piccolo pipes on her arms would shatter their meager defenses. She moved with a musician's rhythm, each attack a perfectly Timed note in a symphony of destruction. She understands resonance, Naruto murmured, his eyes narrowed in focus. He could see the sound waves, visible to his Sharingan as ripples of distorted chakra in the air. She's not just making noise. She's matching the resonant frequency of their uniforms, of the ground, of the air itself. She's tearing them apart on a molecular level with music. Rin stared, her shinobi sensibilities offended yet fascinated. To use sound as a weapon. Our clan has scrolls that speak of such techniques, genjutsu that traps the mind through melody. But this is raw, physical annihilation. Nanan dispatched 6 of her opponents with contemptuous ease, leaving only one standing. A tall, defiant girl from the kendo club, whose 2-star uniform was tougher than the rest. Annoyed by this lingering dissonance in her performance, Nanan decided it was time for her finale. You've been a terribly disappointing audience, she sighed, raising her baton high. So, as an encore, I shall give you a performance you'll never forget. Symphony Regalia. Finale. Her uniform transformed. The bass drum on her back opened up, revealing a colossal cannon. The speakers on her shoulders combined into 2 more. The entire stage around her shifted, becoming a massive sound system, an altar of auditory death. A deep, gut-wrenching hum filled the air as the cannons began to glow with condensed sonic energy. The music swelled to a painful, deafening crescendo. Naruto went still. His sage mode was screaming a warning. He felt the trajectory of the imminent blast. It was aimed at the kendo girl, yes. But its area of effect was massive. It would not only vaporize her, but it would continue onwards, slamming into the upper tiers, the no-star section, directly behind her. Uld feel the life force of dozens of unsuspecting students, Mako among them, who were right in the blast path. They were cheering, completely oblivious to the fact they were about to be erased as collateral damage. This is not our fight, Rin said, sensing his shift in posture, his sudden, coiled tension. We cannot reveal ourselves for this. She's right, Naruto said, his voice dangerously quiet. This isn't a fight. He looked at the glowing cannons, at the terrified kendo girl, at the cheering no stars. It's an execution, and I don't stand by for those. Before Rin could protest, he was gone. He didn't run, he just leapt over the railing, a golden flicker against the gray sky. Down on the field, Nanan swung her baton down. Curtain call, a wave of pure, visible sonic force, a shimmering wall of destruction, erupted from her cannons, tearing up the ground as it surged forward. The kendo girl squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for an impact that would unmake her. But the impact never came. A figure landed silently between her and the oncoming blast. It was Naruto, his back to her, his jacket whipping wildly in the wind generated by the attack. He raised a single hand, his palm open towards the wall of sound. And in his hand, a sphere of swirling blue energy materialized. A Rasengan. But it was different. Instead of the grinding, destructive roar of his usual technique, this one was eerily silent. He had altered the chakra rotation, creating not a grinding force, but a perfect, spinning vortex. A miniature black hole for sound. The colossal wave of sonic energy, a force that could shatter mountains, slammed into the small, silent, blue sphere. There was no explosion, no cataclysmic impact. The sound was simply Eden. The destructive frequencies were drawn into the Rasengan's perfect, silent rotation. Their energy harmlessly absorbed and dissipated into the vortex. For a terrifying, surreal moment, the entire arena was plunged into absolute silence as the world's loudest attack was swallowed by a sphere of perfect quiet. The silence lasted for 3 seconds. Then, as Naruto let the Rasengan fade, sound rushed back into the vacuum with a deafening woof. The crowd, which had been on its feet, fell back into their seats as if struck by a physical blow. Nanan Jakuzer stood on her stage, her mouth agape, her baton frozen in the air. Her ultimate attack, her grand finale, the masterpiece of her symphony, had vanished. It had been nullified, erased, swallowed by a silent, blue ball in the hand of the golden anomaly. Naruto didn't even look at her. He glanced over his shoulder at the terrified kendo girl. You're okay, he said calmly, then leapt back into the stands with impossible agility, landing beside a stunned Rin as if he'd just gone for a stroll. The arena erupted into pandemonium. Satsuki Kuryuin leaned forward on her throne, her fingers steepled before her lips, her eyes gleaming with an emotion that looked terrifyingly like delight. The duel was over. Nanan was declared the winner by default, but her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. She hadn't been defeated. She had been upstaged. Her art had been rendered meaningless. And she would not stand for it. Later, as the crowds began to disperse, Naruto and Rin made their way through the cavernous, echoing corridors beneath the arena. Rin was silent, still processing the sheer, casual audacity of his intervention. To wield such power, not to destroy, but to nullify, it was a concept alien to her clan's desperate struggle. That was foolish, she said finally. You have made yourself the center of attention. You have made an enemy of one of the Elite Four. You have shown your hand. I protected innocent people, Naruto replied simply. That's never foolish. And I didn't show her my hand. I just showed her one card. Speaking of which, a sharp, musical voice cut in. Nanan Jakuzer stood before them, blocking their path. She was out of her uniform now, dressed in a stylish, frilly pink and white outfit, looking more like a pop idol than a weapon of mass destruction. But the smile on her face didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes were cold, hard chips of fuchsia. Golden boy, she began, tapping a finger against her cheek. I must admit, that was quite the entrance. And quite the exit. Very dramatic. But you have a bad habit of interfering with other people's performances. You ruined my finale. Your finale was going to kill about 50 people who weren't even in the fight, Naruto said, his tone level. That's not a performance. That's a massacre. Semantics. Nanan waved a dismissive hand. They were only no stars. Insignificant. What I want to know is, how did you do that? That little silent blue ball. It was very rude. It completely threw off the acoustics of the entire arena. Naruto allowed a small, knowing smile to touch his lips. Your control of harmonic resonance is impressive, he said, and Nanan's expression flickered with surprise. You can shatter steel plating with a targeted C-sharp and liquefy reinforced concrete with a sustained bass note from that monstrosity on your back. Your understanding of destructive frequencies is first class. Nanan was taken aback. He wasn't insulting her. He was analyzing her, critiquing her. But, Naruto continued, his smile fading, your area of effect control is sloppy. Amateurish, even. You threw all that power out without any thought for the splash damage. It's like a master painter using a fire hose instead of a brush. All power, no finesse. Nanan's face went from surprise to indignant. How dare you? My music is finesse. It is art. Is it art to kill your own audience? Naruto countered, taking a step closer. His gaze was intense. You have a gift, Nanan Jakuzer. The power to command the very air with your will. But you use it like a blunt instrument. Imagine what you could do if you actually controlled it. If you could isolate your frequencies, focus them into a single perfect note that could disable an opponent without leveling the city block behind them. That would be true art. That would be a performance worth watching. He had done it again. He had taken her rage, analyzed it, and handed it back to her as a perfectly constructed, infuriatingly accurate critique of her life's work. She was left speechless, her sharp tongue momentarily useless. She had come here for a confrontation, to insult and belittle him. Instead, she had received a masterclass lecture from a condescendingly handsome enigma who understood her power better than she did. She stamped her foot in frustration. Her cheeks flushed. You are the most annoying, pretentious, overbearing person I have ever met. She huffed. Stay out of my way, golden boy. She spun on her heel and stormed off, her pigtails bouncing angrily. But as she walked away, a thoughtful, intrigued frown replaced her angry scowl. Finesse. Naruto watched her go, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. Rin just stared at him, bewildered. How do you do that? She asked. Do what? Antagonize everyone you meet in a way that somehow makes them respect you, she clarified. Before he could answer, a new voice cut through the air. Naruto oh. A human cannonball in a no-star uniform slammed into him. It was Mako, her eyes filled with tears of gratitude, her arms wrapped around his waist in a death grip. You saved us. You saved us all, she cried, looking up at him with hero worship. We were all cheering, and then there was this big whoosh and then a little blue poof and you were there like bam. It was amazing. As a thank you from the entire No-Star community, who I have elected myself president of just now, you absolutely must come to my house for dinner. No arguments. Her declaration was delivered with the force of a tidal wave. Naruto, caught completely off guard by the sudden, physical onslaught of affection, found himself unable to formulate a refusal. He looked helplessly at Rin, who simply shrugged, a rare glimmer of amusement in her own eyes. The journey from the grand, brutalist architecture of Honnuji Academy to the Menkenshoku family's home in the slums was a journey between universes. The wide, clean boulevards gave way to narrow, winding streets. The towering, impersonal structures were replaced by a chaotic jumble of small, cramped apartment buildings, piled on top of each other in defiance of gravity. The air, which had smelled of ozone and power, now smelled of cooking oil, wet laundry, and life. The Menkenshoku apartment was a tiny, two-room flat overflowing with evil of chaotic energy that rivaled the arena. The moment the door opened, Naruto was assaulted by a sensory explosion. The glorious, greasy, and utterly unidentifiable smell of frying croquettes filled the air. Tsukuyo Menkenshoku, Mako's mother, a whirlwind in an apron, was simultaneously cooking, cleaning, and humming an off-key tune. Barazo, her father, a shady-looking man in a doctor's coat, was asleep in a chair, his head lolling back in a snore. And Guts, the family pug, ran circles around Naruto's feet, yipping and snorting with excitement. "Welcome, welcome," Tsukuyo beamed, wiping her hands on her apron. "Any friend of Mako's is a friend of ours. Take a seat. Dinner is almost ready." Naruto found himself seated at a small, wobbly table, a plate piled high with mystery croquettes placed before him. The dinner was a chaotic, beautiful symphony of its own. Everyone talked at once. Barazo, now awake, tried to diagnose him with various fictional ailments. Tsukuyo kept piling more food on his plate. Mako gave a moment-by-moment reenactment of his battle with Nanan, complete with sound effects. For the first time since arriving in this world, Naruto felt the warrior's shell he had built around himself begin to crack. This wasn't a strategic alliance or a tense confrontation. It was just warmth. Unconditional, chaotic, overwhelming warmth. It was a distant echo of ramen nights at Ichiraku, a feeling he thought he had lost forever. "So, Naruto," Mako said, her mouth full of croquette. "You're so strong and cool and mysterious. Do you have anyone special back home? A girlfriend?" The question, so simple and direct, hit him harder than any of Satsuki's interrogations. He thought of his friends, of his village, of the faces he might never see again. A shadow passed over his features. "I had a team," he said softly, his voice barely audible over the din. The table fell quiet for the first time, sensing the sudden shift in his mood. There was a girl, very smart, with pink hair. And another guy, my best friend. My rival. He was kind of a moody, black-haired jerk. A small, sad smile touched his lips. And we had a teacher. A cranky, white-haired old pervert who was always reading stupid books. He looked at the curious, kind faces around the table, and for the first time, he spoke of his past. He told them heavily redacted stories, of bell tests and tree-climbing exercises. Of escort missions gone wrong in funny ways, of their sensei's ridiculous excuses for being late. He didn't speak of the pain, the blood, the war. He spoke only of the connection, the camaraderie, the found family he had lost. As he spoke, he felt a weight he didn't even know he was carrying begin to lift. The Menkenshoku family listened, not with pity, but with genuine, open-hearted interest. They were a sanctuary, a ballad of connection in a world that had been a symphony of destruction. Much later, he stood outside their apartment building, the night air cool on his face. He looked up at the warm, yellow light glowing in their window, a tiny beacon of life in the sprawling darkness. A figure detached itself from the shadows nearby. It was Rin, her face unreadable. "What was that?" she asked, her voice quiet. Genuinely perplexed, she couldn't reconcile the chaotic, loving family with the brutal, rigid world they lived in. Naruto looked from the window to her, and a real, unguarded smile graced his features. "That," he said, his voice filled with a newfound peace. "That is what's worth fighting for." Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Defector and the Anomaly. The warmth. Oh, The Menkenshoku household lingered with Naruto for days, a phantom heat against the cold, biting reality of Honnuji City. It was a fragile, precious memory he sealed away in a deep part of his mind, a glowing ember to be nurtured. The days that followed were a blur of calculated reconnaissance and quiet observation. Under the grudging guidance of Rin, he explored the city's hidden pathways, mapping its arteries and learning its secrets. He moved through the world as a ghost, a whisper in the periphery. He learned the REVOC's patrol schedules, the weak points in the Academy's surveillance network, and the subtle, unspoken languages of the city's disparate factions. He was a shinobi in his natural element, gathering intelligence, preparing a battlefield, and waiting. The city was a powder keg, with Satsuki's oppressive order, Ryuko's chaotic rebellion, and Nudist Beach's clandestine insurgency all acting as volatile reagents. An explosion was inevitable. Naruto's only goal was to ensure he was standing in the right place when it happened, able to direct the blast away from the innocent. The message came on the fourth night after the Natural's election. He was perched atop a communication tower on the city's outskirts, the skeletal structure humming with the flow of data. The night was unusually clear, the perpetual smog cover having thinned enough to reveal a smear of distant, indifferent stars. He was meditating, his senses expanded, sifting through the city's energy flows like a prospector panning for gold, when a new thread appeared in the tapestry. It was not a voice or a sound. It was a direct, targeted pulse of energy, a whisper of pure data aimed directly at his unique chakra signature. It was impossibly precise, a sniper's bullet in a hurricane of digital noise. The pulse itself was a cipher, a complex, multi-layered equation that used the fundamental principles of chakra molding, the very theory behind the Rasengan's rotational mechanics, as its encryption key. It was a message only he, or someone with a profound, theoretical understanding of his power, could possibly decrypt. Intriguing, Kurama's voice was a low rumble of curiosity in his mind. This is not the clumsy hammering of Nudist Beach's technicians, nor the arrogant summons of the Karyuan girl. This is elegant. Someone is speaking our language. Naruto's mind worked swiftly, his wartime experience with Konoha's cipher core coming to the fore. He deconstructed the equation, layer by layer. It was a test, a greeting, and an invitation all in one. The solution wasn't a word, but a set of coordinates, pointing to a location deep within the neighboring metropolis of Osaka, and a specific time, 0200 hours. 2 hours from now, a trap. Rin's voice cut through the night. She had material, IZED behind him with the silence that was her birthright, her face a mask of suspicion as she watched him. She couldn't feel the data pulse, but she could read the sudden, focused tension in his posture. Maybe, Naruto murmured, his eyes still closed, but it's too specific, too personal. A trap is usually a wide net. This is a single, perfectly crafted lure. And I want to see the person holding the line. He stood, the wind whipping at his jacket. Stay here. If I'm not back by sunrise, assume the worst and pull back to the rendezvous point. You are going alone, she protested, a flicker of something, concern. Perhaps, in her sharp gaze. Into a rival city, into an unknown situation. That is reckless. It's necessary, Naruto replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. This message wasn't for Nudist Beach. It wasn't for a shinobi of the Kageyama clan. It was for me. He gave her a final, steady look, then stepped off the edge of the tower. He didn't fall. He simply vanished in a swirling vortex of spatial distortion, the signature ripple of his Kamui leaving a silent, empty space where he had been. His reappearance was just as silent. He materialized in a darkened alleyway in the heart of Osaka, the air thick with the smell of seawater and exhaust fumes. This city was different from Honu. It was a sprawling, glittering expanse of chrome and glass, a testament to orate power rather than totalitarian might. The coordinates from the message led him not to a shadowy warehouse or a clandestine meeting spot, but to the gleaming, 100-story monolith of the Aegis Dynamics Corporation. His Sharingan scanned the building. It was a fortress of modern security. Pressure plates, laser grids, thermal and bio-signature scanners. A frontal assault was impossible. But for a man who could walk through walls, it was trivial. The message, however, had included a secondary protocol, a specific entry point. An anonymous freight elevator in a service tunnel 2 blocks away. The game was afoot, and Naruto decided to play by its rules. The elevator was old, grimy, and smelled of grease. It descended not with a smooth hum, but with a series of groans and shuddering clanks, plunging deep into the earth. It opened into a long, sterile white corridor, identical to the one in Satsuki's tower, but this one felt different. It felt clinical. The air was cold and carried the sharp, clean scent of antiseptic. A voice, calm and feminine, echoed from a hidden speaker. You have a unique biological energy signature, Naruto Uzumaki. Symbiotic, organized, and producing a frankly impossible energy-to-mass ratio. Please proceed. I have temporarily designated your signature as friendly to the security system. Do not touch anything. Naruto walked, his senses on high alert. He passed through multiple biometric checkpoints, retinal scanners and palm print readers that deactivated just as he approached. He was being led deeper into a labyrinth, the rabbit following a digital breadcrumb trail. He finally entered a vast, circular chamber. This was the heart of the laboratory. The room was dominated by a colossal, cylindrical stasis tank in the center, filled with a glowing, pale green liquid. Within the liquid, something floated, a tangled, pulsating mass of dark red fibers, like a grotesque, dissected organ. Wires and probes snaked from the mass, connecting it to a ring of humming supercomputers that lined the walls, their screens filled with cascading streams of complex biological data. And standing before the central monitor, her back to him, was a woman. She was tall and slender, dressed in a sleek, form-fitting black lab coat that seemed tailored to her frame. Her hair was a stark, clinical white, cut in a short, severe, asymmetrical style. Even from behind, she projected an aura of intense, focused intelligence. The sample you see before you is a Class 4 covers unit, captured after the Honnuji skirmish 2 months ago, she said, her voice the same calm, measured tone from the speakers. She didn't turn around, her attention fixed on the data stream. A simple weapon, essentially a mindless bundle of life fibers programmed for aggression. But IT's energy expenditure is, fascinatingly inefficient. It burns through its host's bioenergy at a staggering rate, consuming them in a matter of hours. A disposable weapon for a disposable army. She fell silent, her fingers flying across a holographic keyboard, manipulating the 3D models of DNA sequences on her screen. Who are you? Naruto asked, his voice breaking the clinical silence. I am the one who saw you arrive, she replied. Still not turning. Not with my eyes, but with this. She gestured to the humming machinery around them. This lab is designed to monitor exotic energy signatures. I built it for Aegis Dynamics to research alternative energy sources. Instead, I found a parasite slowly eating the world. Then, 4 nights ago, a new signal appeared. It was like detecting a supernova in a pitch-black room. An organized, symbiotic, biological energy source that didn't just exist, it thought. It reasoned. It created a cipher based on its own quantum structure. It was the most beautiful piece of data I have ever seen. Finally, she turned. Her face was sharp and intelligent, with high cheekbones and a piercing, analytical gaze. Her eyes were a startling, pale lilac color, and they held no fear, no awe. No emotion at all, only an insatiable, scientific curiosity. This was Dr. Aris Thorne. I had to meet the source of that data, she said, her eyes sweeping over him, taking in every detail. I had to understand the anomaly. Aegis Dynamics, Naruto said, his mind putting the pieces together. A rival to REVOCS. The shark to their kraken, Aris confirmed with a wry, humorless smile. We competed for global dominance in textiles and technology. REVOCS won because their source of power, the life fibers, was something our science couldn't replicate or, until recently, even comprehend. I was the head of their bioengineering division. I was tasked with understanding Ragyo Karaiyuan's miracle fabric. I was disgraced when I concluded that it wasn't a miracle. It was an invasion. She walked towards him, her movements precise and confident. She stopped a few feet away, her lilac eyes scanning him with an intensity that felt more invasive than any physical search. Chakra, she said, the word sounding strange and clinical in her mouth. That's what my preliminary analysis suggests. A closed loop, Self-perpetuating energy system generated and controlled by a living organism. It violates several known laws of thermodynamics. It shouldn't be possible. And yet, here you are. Some things can't be explained by science, Naruto said simply. Everything can be explained by science. She countered instantly, her voice sharp with conviction. We simply lack the proper instruments or the correct theoretical framework. You are not magic, Naruto Uzumaki. You are a new form of biology. A higher state of being, perhaps. The perfect symbiosis between a host and an energy source, what my people have been trying and failing to achieve for decades. The air between them crackled. It was not the tension of enemies, but the electric charge between two poles of immense power. His was ancient, spiritual, instinctual. Hers was modern, intellectual, analytical. It was a friction that was both antagonistic and deeply compelling. He was a creature of myth, and she was the scientist determined to write his textbook. What do you want from me? Naruto asked. Your help, she said without hesitation. Ryuko Kyuubi is accelerating her plans. The data from the Naturals election, the increased covers activity, she is preparing for the final stage. My projections, said on the growth rate of the primary life fiber consciousness, give this planet 6 months, tops. After that comes the great unraveling, as the REVOCS internal memos call it. Shinra Koketsu hatches, and the world becomes a dead husk. Its energy consumed. She led him to a terminal, showing him terrifyingly complex simulations. Planetary energy grids failing, ecosystems collapsing, a wave of red fibers consuming continents. I have the science, she said, her voice low and intense. I understand their biology, their weaknesses. But I lack the means to exploit them. Nudist Beach has the zeal. But they are swatting at giants with fly swatters. Satsuki Kyuubi has the power, but she is using the monster's own claws, a fool's gambit that will eventually consume her. But you are different. Your chakra, it is the perfect counter-frequency to the life fibers. It is an organized energy fighting a chaotic one. It is the antibody to this planetary disease. The conversation was a dizzying dance of high-concept metaphysics and hard science. They spoke of the soul, which she called a self-aware quantum energy field. They spoke of his sage mode, which she theorized was a state of macro-scale quantum entanglement with a planet's bio-network. He was a living, breathing refutation of her entire scientific worldview, and she was not afraid of it. She was enthralled by it. The actual fire in her eyes was a seduction all its own, a raw, naked hunger for knowledge that Naruto found strangely familiar. It was the same look Orochimaru had, but stripped of the malice, replaced only by pure, unadulterated curiosity. I can help you, Aris said, her voice softening for the first time, losing its clinical edge and revealing the passionate scientist beneath. And you can help me. Together, we can create a weapon, a strategy, a real defense against the end of the world. She held out her hand. In it was a small, sleek, black device, like a futuristic compass. I designed this after I first detected you. It's a biosignature tracker, calibrated specifically to your chakra frequency. But it has a secondary function. It can detect unique, high-density life fiber signatures, Nui Harame, the Elite Four. Maybe even Ryuko herself. It will allow you to hunt them, to find them wherever they hide. Naruto took the device. It felt cool and smooth in his palm. It was a weapon, a tool, and a peace offering. It was a bridge between their two worlds. I have one condition, Aris said, her lilac eyes locking onto his. Let me study you. Non-invasively, she added quickly, seeing the flicker of caution in his eyes. Energy readings. Cellular analysis from a distance. I need to understand how you work. You are the key to saving this world, Naruto Uzumaki. And I need to know how to turn the key. Her request hung in the air, a proposal of profound intimacy, cloaked in the language of science. To allow someone to see the very fabric of his being, the secret fusion of his soul. With Kurama's, it was a level of vulnerability he had never offered anyone. But looking at her, at the brilliant, desperate, and utterly sincere fire in her eyes, he felt a strange sense of trust. She didn't want to exploit him. She wanted to understand him. And in this strange, hostile world, to be truly understood was a power all its own. All right, Doctor, Naruto said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "You've got a deal, but you're buying dinner first." A ghost of a real, human smile touched Aris Thorn's lips for the first time. "I believe I can accommodate that request." He had descended into the earth to meet a potential enemy. He emerged with a powerful new ally, a crucial new tool, and a connection that crackled with an intellectual and personal electricity unlike anything he had ever known. The game board had shifted once more. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Grey Haven. The battle had been a maelstrom of concrete dust and shrieking life fibers. It erupted without warning. In the industrial sector of Honnuji City, a sprawling wasteland of abandoned factories and rust-eaten skeletons of industry. Satsuki, acting on intelligence that a large-scale covers manufacturing operation was hidden there, had led a lightning raid with her Elite Four. But the intelligence had been a lure. It was a trap, not to kill her, but to capture her. Hundreds of a new type of covers unit, sleek, black, and horrifically fast, moving with a coordinated, canine intelligence, had swarmed them. They were tougher, stronger, and more cunning than any iteration seen before. They fought not with brute force, but with tactics, flanking maneuvers, and sacrificial feints. For the first time, Satsuki Kuryuin and her elite guard were not the predators, they were the prey. Naruto had been observing from a distance. A silent specter on a distant rooftop, the tracker Aris had given him humming softly in his hand. He'd watched as the Elite Four were systematically separated, bogged down by sheer numbers. He'd watched as Satsuki, her junketsu radiating a furious white light, cut down dozens of the creatures, her skill undeniable, but her stamina finite. The enemy's goal became clear: wear her down, exhaust her, and take her alive. The critical moment came when a covers, larger and more monstrous than the rest, feigned a charge, drawing Satsuki's attack, while another burrowed up from the shattered concrete beneath her. Its claws, sharpened like obsidian blades, tore through a weak point in Junketsu's armor, gouging a deep, vicious wound across her side. The gasp of pain that escaped her lips was lost in the din of battle. But Naruto saw the crimson bloom that stained her pure white uniform. He saw her falter, her seemingly unstoppable momentum broken for a single, fatal second. That was when he intervened. He didn't announce his arrival. One moment, Satsuki was surrounded, clutching her side, fighting a desperate battle against overwhelming odds. The next, a golden vortex of teal distortion erupted in the center of the battlefield. Before the cover's units could react, Naruto was there, a silent, golden flash. His hand rested on Satsuki's shoulder, another on the torn fragment of the Alpha cover's unit she had just defeated. "Hold on," was all he said. Satsuki's world dissolved. The cacophony of battle vanished, replaced by an absolute, profound silence. The feeling of concrete beneath her feet disappeared, replaced by nothingness. The gray, smoggy sky was gone, replaced by an endless, uniform expanse of neutral gray. She was floating, weightless, in an infinite, featureless void. The only objects in this silent universe were countless black cubes of varying sizes, drifting lazily in the non-existent currents, like stars in a dead galaxy. The air, if it could be called that, was still. Neither warm nor cold, and held no scent. It was the color, sound, and feeling of absolute neutrality. Her body, however, screamed in protest. The pain in her side, which had been a sharp, fiery agony, now felt like a molten core of pure torment in the sensory deprivation chamber of this new reality. She looked down. The wound was deep, blood pulsing from it in rhythmic, silent bursts. The crimson droplets floating away from her like macabre jewels in the gray void. Her Kamui, Junketsu, was flickering, its power failing as its host weakened. What is this place?" she asked, her voice sounding unnaturally loud and thin in the silence. "My personal dimension." Naruto's voice came from beside her. He floated with a practiced ease, his expression calm and focused. The fragment of the covers he'd brought with them floated nearby, inert. "A little pocket of reality I carry around. No one can find us here. Nothing can get in unless I allow it." He moved towards her, his hands glowing with a soft, green chakra. It was a light that felt fundamentally different from his golden battle aura. This light was gentle, restorative. It felt like life. "Don't move," he said, his voice taking on the commanding tone of a field medic. Junketsu is a parasite. It's trying to heal you by aggressively consuming your blood and energy, but the wound is too severe. It's killing you faster than it's saving you. He placed his glowing hands over her wound, not quite touching her. I need you to force it to release you. Power it down. Satsuki hesitated. To be without Junketsu was to be naked, vulnerable. It was her power, her shield, her very identity. But looking into his calm, steady blue eye, she saw no hint of deception. She saw only a surgeon's focus. With a supreme effort of will, she severed her connection. The brilliant white armor plating retracted, dissolving back into a simple sailor uniform, leaving the grievous wound fully exposed. The pain intensified tenfold, and a wave of blackness threatened to overwhelm her. Stay with me, Satsuki, Naruto's voice anchored her. The green glow from his hands intensified, and a wave of warmth spread through her torso. The agonizing pain didn't just numb, it was actively unraveled, the damaged nerves soothed, the torn muscle fibers encouraged to knit themselves back together. She watched, mesmerized, as the bleeding slowed, then stopped. The edges of the wound began to close with visible speed. It was a miracle of biology, happening right before her eyes. Medical ninjutsu, he explained, anticipating her unspoken question. Control of chakra to vitalize the body's cells, forcing them to regenerate at an accelerated rate. A basic skill where I come from. Basic. The word echoed in her mind. This god-like power of healing was a basic skill to him. The sheer scale of the world he came from, the power its people wielded, was something her strategic mind could barely begin to process. As he worked, a strange intimacy bloomed in the silent void. Here, she was not Lady Satsuki, the iron-fisted ruler of Honnuji Academy. She was not a general, a revolutionary, or a demigod in a suit of armor. She was just Satsuki, a wounded girl being tended to by a mysterious boy who had appeared from another world. The silence, which had at first been unsettling, now seemed to invite a different kind of communication. Why is it so empty? She asked, her voice soft. Her gaze drifted past him, to the infinite gray and the silent, floating cubes. Naruto's hands never stopped their work, but his gaze became distant for a moment. It wasn't always, he said. His voice was quiet, colored with a deep, ancient melancholy. This place reflects the user's mind. When I first learned to access it, it was a mess. A chaotic junkyard of stolen weapons, half-formed thoughts, and junk I'd collected. He paused. The cubes, those are things I've sealed away. Things I need to keep safe. Or things that are too dangerous to be left in the world. Satsuki looked at the countless black cubes, some small as dice, others large as houses. Her mind reeled. What kind of life had he lived? What kind of wars had he fought? To accumulate a private dimension of sealed-away things. And the emptiness. She pressed gently. The silence. His hands stilled for a second. The healing was almost complete, the skin already knitting shut, leaving behind a raw pink scar. This is what's left after a war, he said, his voice hollow. After you lose, everyone, everything, it's the quiet that comes after the screaming stops. He wasn't looking at her, but through her, into a past a million miles away. And for the first time, Satsuki saw past the golden god, past the unflappable warrior, and saw the lonely young man beneath. A survivor, haunted by a silence she couldn't begin to comprehend. You speak as though you've lost a world, she said, the words more a statement than a question. A sad, tired smile touched his lips. I did, he admitted. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. The simple, honest confession, delivered in the stark emptiness of his own soul, was more powerful than any detailed story. It explained everything about him. His effortless power, his weary wisdom, his profound detachment from the petty squabbles of her world. He was a king without a kingdom, a god without a congregation, adrift in a foreign reality. He finished his work. The wound was closed. The pain was gone, replaced by a dull ache and a profound sense of exhaustion. He drew his hands back, the green light fading. Thank you, she said. The words felt inadequate, flimsy. How do you thank someone for saving your life with a casual display of divine power? He simply nodded, then turned his attention to the floating piece of covers. He extended a hand, and thin, glowing chains of golden chakra erupted from his fingertips, wrapping around the fibrous mass. The chains tightened, and the cover's fragment began to convulse, a silent, psychic scream echoing from it. "I brought this here to interrogate it," Naruto explained, his voice once again cold and analytical. Away from any network that could wipe its memory. The Sharingan in his left eye spun to life, its three-bladed form seeming to burn in the gray light. He was delving into the creature's rudimentary consciousness, sifting through its programming, its battle data, its last commands. Satsuki watched, fascinated and horrified. He was not just a warrior and a healer, he was a spy who could rip secrets from the very soul of his enemy. "They are evolving," he said after a long moment, withdrawing his chakra chains. "Smarter, more coordinated." Their commands came from a relay high in orbit, untouchable by conventional means. He looked at her, his expression grim. "And their primary objective wasn't to kill you. It was to capture you. Ragyo wants you alive, Satsuki." A cold dread, an emotion she hadn't truly felt in years, washed over her. It was one thing to fight her mother's minions. It was another to know that her mother had a specific, terrible purpose in mind for her. In that moment of shared, grim understanding, the last of Satsuki's defenses crumbled. Here, in the sterile, silent haven of his soul, stripped of their power and their titles, they were simply two soldiers on the eve of a battle against a cosmic horror. She saw him not as an anomaly, but as an ally. The only being in this world who truly understood the scale of the threat she faced. And he, in turn, saw her not as a tyrant, but as a young woman buckling under the impossible weight of saving a world that didn't even know it was in danger. "Your world," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "The one you lost. Tell me about it." He hesitated. He had never spoken of it. Not to Rin, not to Aris, not even to the Mankenshokets. But here, in this place that was a reflection of his own loss, the words came. He told her of Konoha, the village hidden in the leaves. He described the vibrant green of the forests, the smell of ramen from Ichiraku's stand, the faces of the Hokage carved into the mountain. He spoke not of its power, but of its spirit, the will of fire, the belief that the entire village was a family. He spoke of his team. A brilliant, hot-tempered kunoichi who could shatter the earth with her fists, and a dark, brooding prodigy who was his brother in all but blood. He spoke of their bond, forged in the fires of shared missions and life-or-death battles. He did not use names. He did not give specifics of their wars. He spoke only of the emotions, the connections, the feeling of belonging to a people, to a place. He spoke of the ache of its absence, a phantom limb he would feel for the rest of his life. Satsuki listened, enraptured. She, who had been raised in a gilded cage of cold ambition, who saw people as tools and relationships as alliances, was hearing of a world built on a foundation of love and loyalty. It was a philosophy so alien to her upbringing. Yet it resonated with a deep, hidden part of her soul, the part that had longed for a sister's love, a mother's warmth, a father's pride. "You fight to protect that memory," she stated, a profound understanding dawning in her eyes. "That is why you protect the weak. Every no-star you shield is a citizen of your lost village. Every child you save is a genin you failed to protect." Naruto fell silent. She had seen him. In a single, intuitive leap, she had pierced through his armor and seen the raw, aching heart of his motivation. He finally looked at her, and for the first time, his gaze held no weariness, no distance. It held only a deep, profound respect. "Yes," he said. In the silence that followed, a new bond was forged. It was not the passionate synergy he shared with Ryuko on the battlefield, nor the intellectual fire that sparked between him and Aris. It was something quieter, deeper. It was the bond of two lonely sovereigns, two survivors of different apocalypses, finding a shared strength in a silent, gray haven that was the loneliest place in all of creation. He knew then that Satsuki Karaiyuan would be a formidable ally. And she knew that Naruto Uzumaki was more than just a weapon or an anomaly. He was the only person in the universe who might truly understand the burden of a queen. "It's time to go," he said gently. "Your soldiers will be worried." She nodded, her composure restored. But her eyes held a new softness. "Naruto," she said, her voice firm. "When this is over, when my ambition is realized, I will help you find a way home." It was the greatest promise she could make. A queen's oath. Naruto gave her a small, grateful smile. He knew it was a promise she couldn't keep. But the fact that she had made it was enough. With a final thought, the gray void dissolved. And the screaming, chaotic reality of the battlefield crashed back in on them. They were back in the ruined factory, the battle still raging around them, though it had only been a few seconds in the real world. But everything was different now. The foundation of their relationship had been reforged in the silence of the void. A new, unbreakable pillar now stood in the war against the life fibers. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. A Queen's Gambit, a Fox's Strategy. The air in the Honnuji Academy war room was cold enough to raise goosebumps. This was not Satsuki's sterile, white office of psychological theater. This was the functional, brutal heart of her military machine. The chamber was a hemisphere of dark, unpolished steel, devoid of any decoration save for the light tea bled from the room's centerpiece. A colossal holographic map of the Kanto and Kansai regions, suspended like a captured galaxy in the center of the room. Data streams in crimson and blue scrolled down the walls, and the low, constant hum of the command center's servers was the only sound. Satsuki Kuryuin stood before the map, a pale figure in her white uniform, looking every bit the general surveying her battlefield. Her elite four stood at attention behind her, their faces grim. The atmosphere was thick with the electric tension that precedes a storm. The Tri-City School's raid trip commences at 0600 hours tomorrow, Satsuki announced, her voice cutting through the silence, sharp and clear. Our objective is the complete subjugation of the three primary obstacles to Kanto unification: Osaka, Kobe, and Kyoto. The holographic map zoomed in, highlighting the three cities. Red icons, signifying enemy strongholds, pulsed with ominous light. Intelligence reports that Osaka's Yamamoto Commercial High School is the weakest link, a disorganized rabble of delinquents. We will strike them first in a show of overwhelming force, she continued, her strategy classical and ruthless. The CK wave of their defeat will demoralize Kobe and Kyoto. Kobe's Minato Naval Academy will be a protracted siege, their fleet a significant obstacle. Kyoto's Naniwa Kinmen High School, under the leadership of the insufferable Kaneo Takurata, is a fortress. Their wealth has bought them the most advanced defensive systems outside of Honnuji itself. The campaign will be costly. Projections estimate a timeframe of 6 weeks, with acceptable casualty rates of up to 30%. The Elite Four didn't flinch. These were the harsh mathematics of war, a calculus they had long since accepted. That's a terrible plan. The voice came from the entrance of the war room. Naruto stood there, his arms crossed, his expression one of mild disapproval. He had slipped in unnoticed, a feat that no longer surprised anyone. Gamagori bristled. How dare you question Lady Satsuki's strategy? Satsuki raised a single, placating hand, silencing her loyal subordinate. She turned her cool gaze to Naruto. You have an alternative suggestion. I presume. I do, Naruto said, walking forward until he stood beside her, his eyes on the glowing map. First, you're looking at this like a game of Go, surrounding territory and grinding your opponent down. That's slow, loud, and it gets a lot of your own people killed. You should be looking at it like a game of shogi. Take the king, and the rest of the pieces are just wood. He pointed a finger at the map. Second, your primary assumption is wrong. Osaka isn't the weakest link. It's the linchpin. It's centrally located, and its leadership, while chaotic, is Hat keeps the three cities from trusting one another. Take Osaka, and you scare Kobe and Kyoto into a defensive alliance. A real one. You'll spend months breaking them. He looked at her, his blue eye holding a strategic fire she was beginning to recognize. You don't start with a show of force. You start with a show of the impossible. You don't attack them. You decapitate them. Satsuki stared at the map, then at him, her mind rapidly processing his words. He saw the battlefield with a clarity that was unnervingly precise. It was the viewpoint of a veteran, not a schoolgirl tyrant. Dismissed, she commanded to the Elite Four. They hesitated for a moment, then, at a sharp glare from her, bowed and exited the war room, leaving the two of them alone with the galaxy of light. Your strategy is predicated on bypassing their defenses entirely, she stated, her tone shifting from a commander addressing her troops to one strategist conversing with another. A feat that is, by all conventional military doctrine, impossible. I am not a conventional military asset, Naruto replied simply. Tell me about Kyoto. For the next hour, a new campaign was born. Satsuki, with her encyclopedic knowledge of her enemy's strengths, defenses, and leadership psychology, would present a problem. Naruto, with his impossible, reality-bending abilities, would offer a solution. The plan shifted from a 6-week war of attrition to a 72-hour campaign of surgical decapitation strikes. It was audacious, insane, and, with him as the linchpin, terrifyingly plausible. A queen's gambit, enabled by a fox's strategy. T-Hour 0600. The invasion of Kyoto. The deck of Satsuki's personal aerial command ship, the Naginata, shuddered as it ascended into the cold, clear dawn. Below, the main Honnuji Academy invasion force, a fleet of lesser airships and troop transports, followed in its wake. On the forward deck, Ira Gamagori stood with his personal squad of 10 Elite 1 stars, their shackle regalia uniforms gleaming in the morning light. They were the tip of the spear, the first wave in what should have been a bloody, month-long siege of Naniwa Kinmen High School. Our objective is to breach the main gate. Gamagori boomed, his voice radiating absolute conviction. We are the battering ram against which the walls of Kyoto will break. We will be the first to set foot on enemy soil. For Lady Satsuki. For Lady Satsuki. His squad roared back. Actually, the plans changed. Naruto's calm voice cut in. He appeared beside Gamagori in a swirl of spatial distortion, startling the entire squad into defensive stances. Naruto ignored them, his focus on the giant disciplinary committee chairman. You're still the first ones in. But we're skipping the gate. He looked at the hulking man. Ready. Gamagori, despite his ingrained distrust of Naruto's cavalier attitude, had witnessed his power firsthand. He had also received his new orders directly from Satsuki. He gave a firm, determined nod. Ready. Good. Don't throw up. Before Gamagori could ask what he meant, the world twisted. He felt a nauseating lurch, as if the entire universe was being squeezed through a pinhole. The roar of the Naginata's engines vanished, replaced by a disorienting silence, and then, a new sound. The panicked, high-pitched shrieking of a man in a garish, gold-plated suit. The swirling vortex dissipated. Ira Gamagori and his 10-man squad stood in the opulent, ridiculously decorated command center of Naniwa Kinmen High School. They were deep inside the fortress, having bypassed miles of walls, thousands of guards, and hundreds of automated defense systems. And they stood directly behind the school's leader, the flamboyant millionaire Kaneo Takarada, who was in the middle of a speech about his own greatness to his assembled commanders. The room froze in a state of collective shock. Takarada's commanders stared, their mouths agape. Takarada himself slowly turned, his face, which had been a mask of smug self-assurance, crumbling into pure, uncomprehending terror. Gamagori did not waste the opportunity. With a battle cry that shook the very foundations of the room, he activated his regalia's ultimate form, transforming into a monstrous, multi-limbed creature of pure discipline. The battle for Kyoto's command structure was over in 30 seconds. Simultaneously, all across the fortress city, similar impossibilities were occurring. Uzu Sanejiyama and his kendo squad materialized on the rooftops housing the school's colossal anti-air cannons. They dismantled the weapons before the operators even knew they were under attack. Huka Inamuta's squad appeared inside the primary communication nexus, cutting Kyoto off from the outside world. Naruto, meanwhile, was a phantom executing his own mission. While his clones had transported the other squads, the real Naruto phased through the 6-foot-thick steel walls of Kaneo Takarada's personal treasury. He ignored the mountains of gold, the priceless artifacts, the physical manifestations of a wealth that could buy nations. He walked, intangible, to the central accounting server, a black monolith that contained the true source of Takarada's power, his finances. Naruto materialized his hand just long enough to slap a single, small piece of paper onto its surface. An explosive tag. He phased back out of the vault. A moment later, a small, contained thump echoed from within. Not enough to damage the gold, but more than enough to turn the server's delicate electronics into slag. Kaneo Takarada's empire had been financially neutered. From her command ship, Satsuki watched the red icons on her holographic map flicker and die, one by one. The impenetrable fortress of Kyoto, a city that should have cost her thousands of lives to conquer, had fallen in less than an hour. without a single casualty on her side. A slow, dangerous smile spread across her face. Chi Hour. 1400. The Battle of Kobe. The Minato Naval Academy was a series of interconnected, state-of-the-art offshore platforms, a steel archipelago bristling with cannons. Their fleet of advanced battleships formed a defensive ring that made a direct assault suicidal. Aboard a high-altitude stealth transport, Nanan Jakuzer tapped her conductor's baton against her palm with irritable impatience. Her entire orchestra, along with her massive symphony regalia platform, was secured in the cargo bay. Beside her, Naruto leaned against the bulkhead, his eyes closed. "Are we there yet, golden boy?" she asked, her voice sharp. "My woodwinds are getting anxious. The high altitude isn't good for their reeds." "Patience, maestro," Naruto replied without opening his eyes. "You'll get your stage." Their relationship had shifted after the Naturals election. The animosity was still there, but it was now underscored by a grudging, professional respect. He was the only person who had ever critiqued her art and been undeniably, infuriatingly right. "Just try to keep your destructive tendencies focused this time," he quipped. "The objective is to disable the fleet, not boil the bay." "Oh, please," she scoffed. "Just try to keep up." He opened his eyes and gave her a wry grin. "That's your line." He walked into the cargo bay, placing his hands on the massive metal platform of her regalia. "Everybody hold on to something." A swirling vortex, larger than any he had created before, enveloped the entire orchestra and their stage. For a moment, they existed in the gray, silent void of Kamui, a symphony suspended in nothingness. Then, reality reasserted itself with a lurch. They were no longer in the transport. They were inside a colossal, cavernous dome at the very center of Kobe's main command platform. The acoustics were, as Naruto had predicted from the blueprint, Srs Thorn had secretly acquired for him, perfect. They had materialized in the enemy's concert hall. The naval cadets in the command center on the floor below looked up at the sudden, impossible appearance of an entire orchestra on their observation dome's ceiling, their faces a comical mask of shock. Nanan smirked. This was a stage worthy of her genius. "Showtime," she whispered, and raised her baton. But this was not the symphony of raw destruction she had unleashed before. This was a new composition. "Naruto, give me targets," she commanded. "Engine room, port side," his voice echoed in her ear through a small communicator. "Their primary turbine, resonant frequency is A flat minor. Give it a quick, sharp pulse." Nanan's baton flashed. A low, penetrating note, almost too deep to hear but felt in the bones. Shot from her cannons. On the holographic display Satsuki was watching, the power signature of Kobe's main platform flickered and dropped by 20%. "Excellent," his voice came again. "Fire control system. It's shielded, but the conduits have a harmonic vulnerability at G-sharp major. A sustained crescendo should do it." For the next 10 minutes, they worked in perfect, deadly harmony. He was her eyes and ears, phasing through the fortress, identifying critical systems and their sonic weaknesses. She was the artist, the weapon, translating his data into a precise, targeted symphony of sabotage. She disabled their engines, scrambled their communications, and deactivated their weapon systems, all with specific, isolated musical notes. It was the performance of her life. A demonstration of absolute control. It was finesse. The entire Kobe naval fleet was rendered inert, floating helplessly in the water without power or fire control, all without a single OT being fired or a single life being lost. Chi Hour. 6800. The surrender of Osaka. Osaka didn't even fight. Faced with the news of Kyoto's impossible fall and Kobe's silent castration, and seeing the massive Honnuji fleet blackening their horizon, the famously chaotic delinquents of Yamamoto Commercial High School did the most unexpected thing. They surrendered unconditionally. The legend of the Golden Ghost of Honu, the phantom who could walk through walls and command a symphony of destruction, had done more to defeat them than any army could. Chi Hour. 7200. Victory. Back in the war room aboard the Naginata, the holographic map was a serene, uniform blue. The entire Kansai region belonged to Satsuki Karaiyuan. The Elite Four stood exhausted, covered in grime, but buzzing with the sheer adrenaline of their unprecedented victory. They looked at Naruto, who was calmly sipping a cup of tea he'd procured from somewhere, with a new emotion. It was more than respect, more than fear. It was awe. He was not just an ally. He was a force of nature that had fundamentally broken the laws of warfare. Satsuki dismissed them, leaving her alone once more with Naruto. She walked to the map, her and hovering over the conquered territories. 72 hours, she said, her voice a soft, wondering whisper. My most optimistic projections gave us 6 weeks, with a 30% casualty rate among our forces. She turned to him, her dark eyes intense. We suffered 7 injuries, all minor, sprained ankles and bruised egos. It was a better plan, Naruto said simply, taking a sip of his tea. He didn't need to boast. The results spoke for themselves. They stood in comfortable silence for a long moment, 2 sovereigns surveying their new domain. The strategic shorthand between them was now perfect, an unspoken language of shared glances and mutual understanding. He knew her ambition, and she knew his power. She looked at him, and her expression was one she had never shown to anyone. It was pure, unreserved admiration, tinged with a terrifying possessiveness. In him, she had found more than an ally. She had found her ultimate weapon, the one impossible piece on the board that guaranteed her victory against any foe. With him at her side, her ambition to conquer the world and challenge her mother seemed not just possible, but inevitable. The golden ghost of Honu was hers. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. Revelations in Scarlet and Gold. The Great Culture and Sports Festival was a carefully orchestrated piece of political theater, a victory parade masquerading as a school event. Honnuji Academy, bedecked in the triumphalist banners of Satsuki's recent conquest, celebrated with a discipline that was more intimidating than any riotous revelry. The air was crisp and cold, but a palpable energy, a victorious pride, seemed to warm it. For the first time since Naruto's arrival, a fragile sense of peace had settled over the fortress school. Naruto stood on the main viewing platform beside Satsuki's throne, an honored guest in the heart of the empire he had helped expand. He was an anomaly in their rigid hierarchy, belonging to no club, wearing no stars, yet afforded a respect that even the Elite Four, standing nearby, now offered without reservation. The recent campaign had forged a new dynamic. He was no longer just a mysterious power, he was a proven strategic asset, a comrade in arms. It is an impressive display, he commented, his gaze sweeping over the tens of thousands of students moving in perfect, synchronized formations on the grounds below. You've given them a victory. It's a powerful motivator. A unified front is a strong front, Satsuki replied, her voice calm, but her eyes held the glint of triumph. Today, they see the fruits of their discipline. They see that their loyalty is rewarded with strength. But even as she spoke, the world began to disagree. The wind, which had been a gentle breeze, picked up a sudden, violent edge, tearing at the triumphant banners. The sky, which had been a clear, cold blue, began to darken with an unnatural swiftness, churning gray and bruised purple clouds rolling in from the sea. A storm was coming, one that felt far too sudden, too aggressive, to be natural. Satsuki was in the middle of her address to the student body, her voice booming with regal authority, when the true storm arrived. It was not a vessel of the sky, but of the sea, a colossal aircraft carrier, impossibly large, its hull painted a pristine, sterile white and bearing the ubiquitous logo of the REVOCS Corporation. It emerged from the churning storm clouds like a shark rising from the depths, its shadow falling over the entire academy, plunging the festival into a sudden, ominous twilight. The students gasped, their discipline. D formations wavering for the first time. The Elite Four tensed, their hands moving towards the activation triggers of their uniforms. Satsuki's speech cut off, her face a mask of cold, controlled fury at this audacious intrusion. But Naruto felt it before he saw it. His sage mode, which had been peacefully humming along with the victorious energy of the crowd, suddenly screamed. It was a silent, psychic shriek of pure agony. The natural energy of the world around them wasn't just being disturbed, it was recoiling, pulling back in abject terror as if from a source of absolute poison. The air grew thick, the pressure dropping, and a sense of profound, soul-deep wrongness permeated everything. From the deck of the carrier, a figure descended, walking on a shimmering staircase of rainbow light that seemed to solidify out of the storm-racked air. It was a woman of impossible beauty and charisma, her long, flowing hair a cascade of iridescent colors, her smile radiating a warmth that felt like a physical force. She wore a stunningly elegant gown, and her every movement was grace personified. To the tens of thousands of students below, she was a divine apparition, a goddess descending from the heavens. To Naruto, she was the most terrifying thing he had ever sensed. That is not a human. Kurama's voice was a deadly serious growl, stripped of all its usual cynicism. Naruto, be on guard. There is no soul there. It's a void, a black hole shaped like a woman. He didn't need the warning. His Sharingan was active, and it saw through the glamorous illusion. He saw no human chakra network, no life force, no spirit. He saw a writhing, horrifyingly complex nest of life fibers, woven together with terrifying precision to mimic a human form. The charisma, the beauty, the rainbow light, it was all allure. The hypnotic display of a predator designed to mesmerize its prey before the kill. This was not a person. This was the source of the planetary sickness. This was the parasite's heart. Ryuko And Satsuki, my darling daughter. Ryuko's voice, amplified by some unseen technology, washed over the arena. It was melodious, loving, and utterly false. You have done so very well. To unite all of Japan under your banner, you have exceeded all my expectations. Your mother is so very proud. Satsuki's posture was rigid, her face unreadable, but Naruto saw the microscopic tremor in her hand. The arrival of her mother was not a surprise she welcomed. As Ryuko landed gracefully on the stage, another figure skipped out from behind her, a blur of pink frills and unsettling cheerfulness. A small girl with a giant pink bow and a sweet, psychopathic smile. Nui Harame. Hi, Satsuki-sama, Ryuko-chan, she chirped, waving gleefully. Isn't Lady Ryuko just the best? So radiant. Ryuko, who had been standing with Mako in the crowd, froze. The sight of Nui, the bubbly monster with the flower-shaped eye patch, sent a jolt of pure hatred through her. What is she doing here? Ryuko growled, her hand instinctively gripping the ring that activated Senketsu. Nui giggled, her smile widening. Oh, Ryuko-chan, you look so angry. Is it because of what happened to your daddy? She tilted her head, her expression one of mock innocence. You know, Isshin Matoi, he was a brilliant scientist, but he was so rude. He tried to hide his secrets from Lady Ryuko. So, I had to punish him. She brought a finger to her lips, her visible eye crinkling in a smile. I'm the one who poked out his eye and ran him through with his own scissor blade. Oops. The world shattered. The carefully construed CTED dam of Ryuko's rage burst into a tidal wave. With a scream that was pure, undiluted animal fury, she launched herself towards the stage. Life fiber override. Kamui Senketsu. She was a crimson meteor of vengeance. Her scissor blade aimed directly at Nui's heart. But Nui just giggled, sidestepping the blow with an impossible, fluid grace. She didn't block or parry. Instead, she produced a single, shimmering purple thread from her fingertip, the banshee, and with a flick of her wrist, she unraveled a key thread in Senketsu's structure. Ryuko cried out as she felt a sharp pain, her uniform sparking and threatening to come apart. Nui was deconstructing her partner, her armor, her very power, with casual ease. You're too slow, Ryuko-chan. Nui chirped, dodging another furious strike. Naruto saw it all. Ryuko's rage was making her predictable. Nui was toying with her, and Ryuko was watching with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing rats in a maze. He couldn't let it continue. He vanished from the platform and reappeared on the stage between the two combatants, his hand catching Ryuko's descending scissor blade, his grip firm but gentle. Enough, Ryuko, he said, his voice calm but firm. She's baiting you. You can't fight her like this. Get out of my way, Naruto. Ryuko screamed, trying to wrench her blade free. This is my fight. Oh, the golden boy wants to play, too. Nui giggled, her attention shifting to Naruto. Her smile was wide, but her eye was cold. She lashed out with the banshee, aiming to unravel him as she had Senketsu. The purple thread hit Naruto's chest and did nothing. It passed harmlessly over his jacket. There were no life fibers to deconstruct. He was an unsolvable equation to her power. Nui's smile faltered for the first time. What? My turn, Naruto said, his voice dangerously low. He released Ryuko's blade and moved. He didn't use a Rasengan, didn't cloak himself in golden fire. He simply used his speed. He was a blur, closing the distance instantly. Nui, for all her impossible speed, found herself on the defensive. She tried to strike him with her razor-sharp fingers, but her hand passed through his intangible shoulder. He was using Kamui, phasing through her attacks with infuriating ease. He was a ghost she couldn't touch, a phantom she couldn't unravel. Her playful facade began to crack, replaced by a scowl of genuine frustration. Watching from the sidelines, her rage festering, Ryuko's mind finally broke. The sight of Naruto fighting her battle, the sound of Nui's laughter echoing in her ears, the raw, searing grief for her father, it was all too much. Her blood, already boiling, began to sing with the dark, hungry song of the life fibers within her. "I'll kill you," she whispered, her voice a low, guttural growl. "I'll kill you all." Her body exploded in a volcanic eruption of blood and rage. Senketsu, overwhelmed by her sheer, uncontrollable bloodlust, lost control. The uniform swelled, mutated, consuming her entirely. The crimson threads wrapped around her, spikes erupted from her back, and her face contorted into a monstrous, fanged visage. This was no longer Kamui Senketsu. This was a mindless, berserk beast of pure destruction. The monster roared, a sound of pure agony and hatred, and lashed out, its claws tearing deep gouges in the stage. It attacked everything in sight: Nui, the surrounding speakers, and even Naruto. Satsuki and the Elite Four watched in horror. "Subdue it," Satsuki commanded, preparing to activate Junketsu. "Don't." Naruto's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and absolute. He created a dozen shadow clones, which immediately engaged the berserk Ryuko, not attacking, but hurting her, containing her rampage with their sheer numbers and coordinated taijutsu. "You'll kill her if you fight her seriously. That's still Ryuko in there. I can save her." He turned to his real body to face the stunned Satsuki. "Keep everyone back, no matter what happens." Then he turned and faced the monster his friend had become. He knew what he had to do. He had to walk into the storm. He dodged a wild swing from the berserker and placed his open palm on its forehead. He closed his eyes, focusing his will, channeling his chakra not outwards, but inwards. He activated a technique he had copied from Inoichi Yamanaka during the war, a dangerous, invasive mental jutsu, and amplified it with the vast, empathetic power of Sage Mode. Mind-body transmission jutsu. His consciousness plunged into a sea of raging, blood-red chaos. This was Ryuko's mindscape, a roiling, crimson ocean churned under a black, starless sky. Battered by waves of pure hatred. In the center of the tempest, chained to a crumbling black pillar by thick, living threads of fiber, was Ryuko. She was thrashing, screaming. Her body half dissolved into the monstrous form that was consuming her. Naruto appeared before her, a calm, stable island of golden light in the raging storm. "Get out!" The chained Ryuko shrieked, her voice distorted and monstrous. "Get out of my head! Can't you see? I'm a monster!" Naruto didn't flinch. He walked across the churning sea of her rage as if it were solid ground and sat down cross-legged before her pillar of despair. He looked at the chains, at the consuming threads, at the girl who was drowning in her own pain. He saw a mirror of his own past. "A monster," he said, his voice calm and gentle. A stark contrast to the howling gale. "You think this makes you a monster? Being filled with a power you can't control. A rage that feels like it's going to eat you alive." He shook his head. "I know a little something about that." He told her about Kurama. He told her of the loneliness of being a Jinchuriki, of being feared and hated for the beast sealed within his soul. He described the searing, intoxicating power of the fox's rage, the temptation to give in, to let it all burn. He spoke of how he had fought the beast, hated it, and finally, faced it. How he had learned that the rage was born from pain, the hatred from loneliness. How he had learned that true strength wasn't in caging the monster, but in befriending it. "This rage, this power, it isn't your enemy, Ryuko," he said. His golden form radiating a gentle warmth. "It's a part of you. You don't have to fight it. You just have to listen to it." He extended his hand, not to the monster, but to the girl chained within it. "You're not alone in this storm. Let me help you." His words, his empathy, his complete and total lack of fear in the face of her monster, were a lifeline. A single, pure tear traced a path down Ryuko's cheek. A drop of saltwater in an ocean of blood. The raging sea began to calm. The howling wind softened to a whisper. The consuming threads loosened their grip. Back in the real world, the berserk creature shuddered violently, then collapsed. The monstrous form receded, separating into an unconscious Ryuko and a heavily damaged Senketsu, who lay beside her like a discarded skin. Naruto, his real body kneeling beside her, opened his eyes, a deep exhaustion etched on his face. He had pulled her back from the brink. A slow, deliberate clapping echoed across the now quiet stage. Ryuko Kyuubi stood there, her smile as radiant and terrifying as ever. "Bravo," she purred, her voice dripping with condescending admiration. "A most novel and intimate technique. To see on of my darling daughters rescue the other, it warms a mother's heart." Satsuki froze, the words hitting her like a physical blow. "What did you say?" Ryuko's smile widened into a predatory grin. "Oh, Satsuki, did you truly not know? This girl, Ryuko Matoi, is the second child you were told died in infancy. Your little sister." She spread her arms wide, a grandmaster revealing her final move. Both of you are my magnificent successes. Not truly human, but a glorious fusion of mankind and the divine life fibers. You are my children, my creations, my tools. The revelation was a nuke, designed to shatter their identities, to reduce them to mere experiments. But its effect was not what Ryuko intended. Satsuki looked from her mother's monstrous, smiling face to the unconscious girl on the ground, her sister. She felt not horror, but a white-hot, protective fury. Naruto rose to his feet, positioning himself protectively over Ryuko's body. He glared at Ryuko, his sage mode senses telling him all he needed to know about the truth in her vile words. He then looked at Satsuki, whose world had just been torn apart. "Our origins don't define us," Naruto said, his voice ringing with absolute conviction. His words a direct challenge to Ryuko's genetic tyranny. "We choose who we are. She's not your tool, she's your sister." His words were the anchor in the storm. Satsuki's eyes, which had been wide with shock, hardened into points of cold, obsidian resolve. The old lines were gone. The game had changed. It was no longer a dozen different factions fighting for their own goals. It was them, Satsuki, the avenging queen, Ryuko, the unconscious sister, and Naruto, the golden pillar standing between them, against the smiling, woven god who sought to devour the world. Chapter 8 End. The end. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.